Good evening, everyone. How you doing on this Friday night? Feeling good, I hope. Done with the work week. Sit back and relax. And welcome Niko to the channel. Niko, how you doing?
Hello. I am glad it's Friday. It's been a really long week, so I am happy.
Yeah, for me too. Um, man, and I've been watching your channel for years, just just churning out quality review after quality review for basically it seems like everything you read. And we've been commenting on our each other's videos for so long, and now we finally get to actually chat and sit down. So thanks
Yeah.
for coming on short notice, because I never plan too far ahead. So that's great if someone's available on short notice.
I get that 100%. And I always mean to do more things like this. So thank you so much for inviting me because I'm so bad about actually like doing things like this. And so I feel like people like, well, he doesn't do those lives. Maybe he doesn't want to be on other people's. And so I feel like I don't get asked sometimes. I'm like, no, I'm totally fine too. I'm bad at planning in advance as well. And so I do try to make sure I get some going sometimes, but uh,
Yeah, I don't see you like going on the live chat circuit too often, so we got to get you out there more. But I'm curious. I know you recently posted about becoming a father for the first time, right? Congratulations,
yes.
man!
Thank you.
Congrats! I mean, I couldn't imagine it. Like my wife and I, we love dogs or the idea of dogs, but we still haven't been able to take the plunge and get a pet, knowing the responsibility of that and the time commitment. And so, man, the idea of going that much farther step is almost unimaginable to me. So, congrats on that. And I'm sure that's just changed a lot of things. But what has it done to your reading life? Are you still finding the
Oh
time
man.
to crack open those books every day? Is it less than before?
Oh, it's definitely less than before. I will say too, though, the being smart, thinking about like, do we have the time for this commitment is a really good idea because I've been with my wife for over 11 years at this point, and it took a long time for us to get there. And like a lot of people are like, oh, let's just do it right away. Yeah, and I'm like no, so it took a little bit, but yeah, the reading time has been cut down. Audio has been my savior, I will say,
Nice,
because
nice.
it has been so much easier to listen to audio, and audiobooks have been my friends through like middle of the night feeds at points, and sometimes when I'm just like super tired and either don't have time to sit down and read, or like I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to stay awake if I do that. I can do audio while I'm doing something else or whatnot. And so that's really helped. This month, I actually finished my first book only a couple of days ago. I was reading a bunch of different things, and it was like it was a great book. I've been reading it here and
Mm.
there all month, but it took me just forever. So I've been a little slower on the physical and Kindle reads, but
Ah, yeah.
I'm getting
But it's
there.
great. It's amazing that audiobooks have become so widespread, amazing narration all over the place, and so easy to get them cheap or for free through libraries and Audible sales and everything. So, yeah, audios have really just saved my reading life too in this period where I'm so busy with work and busy with wife and family stuff. Like, man, no matter what low, I can find some time throughout a day for some audio, even if it's just in the shower or going for a little walk to get out, or doing some chores, mowing the lawn, put in the noise canceling
Yeah,
headphones. Like, I
mowing
love
lawn
that
is
book time.
prime audio time.
And we got Theo here looking for some advice. Theo, welcome this evening. And we have Britton in the house. Hey, Britton. And Heidi with some jokes. That is true, though. You got to really plan out like where you can take your dogs. But the kids basically allowed most everywhere. And
That
oh,
is,
Heidi,
I mean, it
thank
is
you
fair.
about that is my booktube contribution that I am most proud of, is that top 30 narrators series, because that took more prep than anything I do, because found samples that I thought were representative and non-spoilery, and editing all that together took a long time. But I'm happy I was able to do that, because I haven't seen something like that where I thought, okay, I listen to audiobooks. I'm an audiobook lover all the time, so I thought I'd put mine out there. And Niko, you're pretty new though to audio, right? Like, you were a print only guy for a while, right? Was it only somewhat recently
Oh
that you broke in?
so
Oh yeah.
it's been a bit now, but I mean, I was strictly print for most of my life, and I only finally embraced Kindle because the thing I think that finally sold me on it is I was trying to read. Honestly, I think it was Way of Kings Prime or something on my phone. And
Mm.
granted, I DNF'd it anyway, but I was trying to read it on my phone. And I'm like, this is awful. And so I finally, I got like a Kindle Paperwhite on a really good deal. And I'm like, oh, hey, Drew. He is one of
Hey,
my
Drew.
first ever subscribers. Fun
Yeah.
fact. Um, really early days, probably too early, um, but yeah, so I finally I gave in and I'm like, okay, this is pretty nice because like reading in bed, it's fantastic too, instead
Yeah.
of actually
Yeah.
trying to hold the book open. But then I slowly, it's like the last year or two, I slowly eased into audio. I did the Wheel of Time because I'm like, I was concerned about how much I'd be able to focus. And so I'm like, I could zone out through half a Wheel of Time book and still know exactly what's going on because I've read it so many times. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was
It's
a good
perfect to get into it. Perfect.
introduction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I can't imagine my life without audiobooks because you know, my commute to work, mowing the lawn, things like that. Like I said, always have one going. And yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many really great ones that are just really, really fun to do on audio. So
I find that it aids my focus, that I zone out less when I'm listening to audio than if I'm reading in print. And if I'm, especially if people are home in the house and there's noise going on, people are interrupting. Like if I can enter a zone with audio where I have a lot of uninterrupted time, like going on a long walk or mowing the lawn or something like that, that is just perfect for my focus. And even when I come back inside, if I have more reading time, I might just do it immersively, where I keep the audio on and I'm just reading along with it in print. And that could be fun because if there are some narrators that are so good that I don't want to miss out on a single bit of their performance, then I'll make use of my print book because I usually will buy multiple versions of everything, which is insane, but have the audiobooks, print.
understand.
So I'm like, oh, I'm going to make use of my purchases. So like narrators who are amazing, like Rupert Farley for the Sharp books by Bernard Cornwell. Like I didn't want to miss out on a moment of his narration. So or Samuel Rackin with Sun Eater books, and I will
I
do
need
those
to.
immersively. Man, but the Kindle thing is interesting. I resisted Kindle for a while. After college, I went to be a volunteer teacher in the Marshall Islands on a very remote atoll in the middle of the Pacific, and I knew I was going to have a lot of reading time. But instead of bringing a Kindle out with me, I shipped ahead a couple boxes of books, which
I love it.
funnily enough, they were sitting on the patio of the program coordinator, and they got stolen. But in the small
Oh
community,
no.
they ended up not wanting the books. That was not going to be of value to them. They brought them back and threw them back. And so I had all of my books out there on the island, and it would have been easier to take the Kindle out with me. But I loved just reading out there in that peaceful place with no internet, no distractions. Like I had some of my most peaceful reading time. But this brings me to something that I want to chat about. So in this period of my life, like I grew up loving Harry Potter, just binging Harry Potter again, rereading it. But at some point, I just thought like I'm a big Harry Potter fan, but not like a fantasy fan. Like it didn't occur to me that I should really try to seek out the stuff. I think I bounced off Aragon, and that was my one branching out that didn't work. So I'm like, okay,
Fair.
I'm actually a Harry Potter fan. And then I was just like, I'm gonna read serious literature for the rest of my life after that. And it was a lot of lit fic, nonfiction, autobiographical stuff, classics. And it was not until one of my best friends really forced Mistborn upon me because I was staying over his place and he didn't have that many books besides some modern fantasy and sci-fi. But I resisted it. I was like, okay, you have this sci-fi series, John Scalzi, Old Man's War, like I'll read that. And that was okay. And then I was over his place, staying over again, and all he had was like fantasy stuff. And I picked up Mistborn, like, okay, a secondary world, like it's a little juvenile. And I fell in love. I fell in love with reading all over again as an adult, coming back to fantasy. And it's been just one giant fantasy binge since that was in like 2018 for me. And I've definitely continued to do sprinkle in sci-fi and start in historical fiction, but I'm kind of curious. You read a ton of fantasy. Like, I know you read a lot of Wheel of Time, I think, like in your younger years. Did you ever move away from fantasy, or have you always just embraced it and kept that train rolling?
So I pretty much have, and don't hate me, but I was never a Harry Potter fan. But I'll explain why, because there are, I think, reasons why. Um, I'm in the right age group where I probably should, but when I were like, first got really into reading and I was really young, like, I just basically would read whatever was available because you're a kid, you don't really have that many options. And so like I read a bunch of like Magic Tree House and whatnot when I was a kid. But um the thing that I credit with the start of my love of fantasy, and it took a while to come back around, but it was I can't remember. Oh, it's right here. Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander.
Ooh.
Funnily enough, it was I'm pretty sure the last book that I read when I was really young because my like elementary school library had it. And so I read it and then I forgot about it for many years and then like kept trying to figure out what it was. But I ended up circling back around to fantasy. But I started reading The Wheel of Time when I was in like fifth grade.
Mhm.
Um, and so I skipped over everything like age appropriate at the time and just started reading that and then just reading everything I could get my hands on fantasy.
Yeah.
And so I read all kinds of stuff, but a lot for years I just used to basically just read The Wheel of Time over and over
How
again.
did you
Um,
end up reading that like in fifth grade? The Eye of the
so
World?
yeah, well,
Did
because I
someone
was
give
I
that
was
to you? Did you just stumble upon it? Like,
So I had liked fantasy, and it actually my dad said that he read that way back in the day, and so I'm like, okay, and so I go to the public library, and they had the first book, and I check it out, and they had book one and book three, and at the time, it was only up to Knife of Dreams was out, and
mhm.
so I literally would just have them. I'd interlibrary loan each consecutive book over and over again, and keep reading them. But the annoying thing was, despite the fact that these were books for adults, the Lexile, I don't know if you did that, it's like the score for books and like the difficulty level.
No, no.
It, well, our school was dumb and did it. And so because it's fantasy, they had like a super low rating. And so I had to read like other stuff. I had to read like super short, like Gary Paulson books because those counted, just so that I could read my, 1,000-page Wheel of Time book that
Oh
I
my
wanted to
god,
read.
yeah.
So it was, I mean, it was a whole thing. But yeah, I read those, and then I was really active back in the day in a Wheel of Time forum, and just tried to find. I'm like, okay, what's every other big fantasy series that I should read, and that's kind of I started reading them from there, and I slowed down in my reading a little bit around college, and I was reading slower, but I was still, for the most part, still reading something. But I've way picked up since starting BookTube, which in the early days, it was literally, I didn't even know there was a community. I just talked to
Hmm.
myself. I didn't even
Yeah.
record video. It was just audio and just talked, and nobody watched it. But I started putting out several videos a week until someone found it. But yeah, I still, it's my quest. I want to read all the big fantasy series, and I'm always finding more. So it's like an impossible task. But um,
So
that's
so
where
you're
it's.
prioritizing your quest for fantasy.
Yeah.
So like, are other genres sneaking in every now and then? Are you pretty committed to that quest? I see you read a little bit of sci-fi here and there,
Yeah.
but is it mostly fantasy for you? That's your true love, and you're kind of just like staying in that lane most of the time.
I do mostly do fantasy. I've tried to be better about doing some different stuff because I have found some other stuff that I've absolutely loved. And I'm actually in October. I'm having multiple people pick books that are completely out of my comfort zone for me to read, just
Ooh,
to try different stuff. Um, but I justify mostly reading fantasy because it's my favorite genre, and there are more fantasy books than I can read in my entire life.
yeah, yeah,
So it's like it's hard to wanna spend a lot of time digging into other genres, um,
yeah.
when I could
If you
focus
if
more.
your if your FOMO is going to be so strong for the fantasy series, like I think you're a connoisseur like I am of used bookstores a little bit. Is there
Yes.
anything better than than just spending a few hours looking through every single book on the shelves of the fantasy and science fiction section of a used bookstore. I don't think there's anything better in life. But
It's pretty great.
I always come across authors that I'm like, wow, I have not heard a single word about them on BookTube, and I watch a lot in years, or even like when I used to be pretty active on Our Fantasy before BookTube, and there will still be authors and series from 70s, 80s, 90s, even series written in 2000s where they're still TradPub, just like off the current radar, like way off the current radar.
Wild.
And there's so many. Like I'll be cruising through, and every used bookstore will have a giant section for like L.E. Modsit or
reading those now.
All Piers Anthony and these authors that just hear almost nothing about it.
I don't have the one I'm in the middle of right now. This is book 2, but I started his Recluse saga. There are like 20 some books. They've been being published for decades. Nobody talks about these, and that's where I found that's my niche. And I do tend to be a niche channel, and I know I'm never going to be huge because I don't read the popular stuff.
Yeah. This one's I got the whole bundle actually from a used bookstore in mass market. That was purely because of you, and this is here because this is my Niko TBR, my Kate Elliott, and also Jenny Wirtz. I got to read because of you.
What's that cover? Hold on.
This is from a used bookstore. This is not the one I've
never seen. That is so cool. I've never seen that cover before. Huh.
Oh, really cool.
Okay, I have a. Mine is up here. Who's the publisher on that one? That's one I have.
See. This is a nice big trade paperback by Voyager.
Huh. Okay.
So that's a full wraparound painting. It's a full wraparound painting. It's a really cool painting.
Yeah, well, because she does her own art. But that one that must be UK because I have the US version.
Man, I got this for $4. I love used bookstores.
Yes. Well, that was
illustration by Jenny Wirtz. Wow,
Jenny Wirtz.
Wow. Yeah. She painted that one. She painted it. Wow.
She does her own art, but both Jenny Wirtz and Kate Elliott, 2 authors that I love, random used bookstore finds where I'm just like, that cover looks interesting.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Britain got retweeted by she's been very active in the online community, getting herself out there.
Look at that.
Nice.
I love a good. I love a good. Whatever the heck.
I love a good. You gotta love an omnibus. Gotta love that. Hey Pete, welcome. And Alicia's planning to pick up Kate Elliott soon.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a solid niche of yours. Is the obscure trad pub. I mean, trad pub itself, just within like fantasy, is overwhelming to me. Of just like trying to catch up on what's been published, and then there's self pub, which has just exploded the amount of books that people are reading in this community, just in fantasy. And are you like trying to dip your toe in a little bit to that too, or how are you balancing trying to discover self pub? I mean, I have difficulty with it because my trad pub TBR gets out of control with things I get from used bookstores or Book Outlet. And so I have a lot of trad pub stuff that has to take priority because I've already spent money on it. And then the self pub also, I'm worried about just wasting time on things that don't end up working. Whereas in trad pub, like people that might have filtered it for you, or you've gotten a sense of it's for you somehow, being a part of the community, or even it feels like there's worth to reading it, even if you don't love it, because you could discuss it with other people who might have read it too, versus just like obscure self pub that maybe will never take off. You might kind of just be reading it in a little silo, and if it doesn't work, like that was a kind of waste of a time. But how have you kind of conceived of this trying to balance like the trad pub versus self pub reading world?
Well, I mean, you make great points, and it's something that I'm not as focused on self pub as a lot of people are, and there's so much self pub that I do plan to get to, and I mean I have copies of a lot of things that I want as well, But it is hard because like I've recently, I'm gonna regret it, but I've recently started accepting review copies again, very slowly. But I've just been inundated over time. And I found some things that I've really loved, but I've also found a lot of like, kind of stuff too that way. So it
Yeah,
definitely
it's.
adds a
I mean,
lot, but
it's probably worth the time if you do discover gems in there. Like you turned me on to becoming a druid, which I really liked.
yes,
I really liked, and
I,
there you're just
yeah,
like you're reading a book that very few people have read, and then I'm a little less of a risk taker, I think, with these things. I read, um, and and so I wait for someone like you who I follow to review it, be like, okay, I feel confident enough to give this one a chance because the review copies I get where like almost no one has even rated them or reviewed them yet,
yeah.
and it's a debut author, and I'm like, wow, it takes so much like time and energy for me to like get into a new world and new writing style and the opportunity cost of
It can be
passing up like
tough.
something that's been on my priority TBR for like years. Like I feel that opportunity cost so much if I'm reading something I'm not loving. So it's tough for me to
Yeah.
pick up review copies.
Well, and it's something too is there is something to be said about when you kind of get in on the ground floor and you get to really like be
Yeah.
involved. I got PLs too right behind me. I need to continue. First two. These are so good.
Nice.
They're very niche, I feel like too. But they are so good.
See, I
But
that's
yeah,
that's
it's
another
because I
category
had
of books
some
where I
students.
wanna read them because I like the author. Like I like the person. Like I've seen him so much on BookTube that like, oh, I actually want to pick
Yeah.
those up because I like the person and I hope that will translate to liking the books as well. But then you get into
It's
some weird
tough when you
situations where
don't.
like yeah, like you get into some weird situations like I got into it. Like I really liked The Severing Sun by Von Roycroft. And then he saw my review and we communicated. I became a beta reader for book 2 and just like I really bounced off book 2. Like I love Vaughn so much as a person. Like it was such a weird thing for me to like, oh, I'm not loving this as much as I love book 1. And it was I gave as the fair, truthful feedback as I could and he was really respectful about it, but it just like it created a situation that I wasn't as thrilled with compared to like if I'm just reading like huge famous trad pub authors that I don't have to have any relationship with them. I don't have to worry like about like if my because like for books like these, your review or your Goodreads review or book to review, it has an outsized impact for the author compared to reviewing
Mhm.
a Brando Sando book. So it creates this different dynamic that I know a lot of people relish because they almost like are just fully in the indie scene, and that is awesome. But uh, it's yeah, I don't love being within that kind of like less distance situation with the authors as much. I think, but so far
Totally
I've
get
been
it.
interacting a lot
Yeah.
with Mike Mullman, and I've enjoyed all 3 of his books so far. If that falls off, that'll get a little awkward. Mike, are you still in here? I think he'll be cool with it
I was
though.
gonna say Mike would totally be cool with it. I was gonna say if you haven't read it though yet, I joke that this one is my favorite, truly because I'm absolutely biased because there's a couple of special characters that appear in this book. One of them which may
Ooh,
or may not bear my name. But
ooh, wow.
I
Ooh,
suppose it's been out long enough that Andrew and I appear in this book in the most
wow.
hilarious way. Um, it's
Oh man.
so I Andrew hadn't read it yet when I read it, and I just sent him like the longest message because I was just like dying laughing. It was so much fun. But
Oh,
I
Mike's
do
enjoying
I
that.
do get it though, because I've had it where it's always hard when you've already interacted with and got to know somebody, and
Yeah.
then you read their book. Because I've had it where
Yeah.
like I had an
Yeah.
author,
Yeah, yeah.
somebody I still interact with, I still really like, I did not like their book. And I gave it kind of a middling review. Thankfully, it wasn't like terrible or anything, and because I'm always honest. But um, the self pub things that actually really not liked have been people I've not interacted with, which is probably
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
And most
yeah,
of
yeah.
them are really popular, so they still fall into the camp of my dislike doesn't matter. So
Oh, Heidi's joking around some more in here. Wannabe writer was a deal breaker. But I've been waiting
oh
on
man,
Desperate Dispatches. So one of the issues I've now run into, so I, as an audiobook lover, as much as I am, is that it's gone too far. Like in those like post college years, I was dipping into audiobooks every now and then, and I listened to a few that I really loved, uh, like um, Bryan Cranston's narration for The Things They Carried. I listened to Moby Dick. That was a solid one. Um, American Pastoral by Philip Roth. Like I was reading a lot of lit fic, and some of those audiobooks I remember really fondly, but I was mostly reading in print. And then as I was commuting to work more and listening to audiobooks for fantasy, that I just got so wrapped up in, with the Dresden Files with James Marsters and the Stephen Pacey's First Law audios, I I started to become so attached to audiobooks that I almost like need to have audios, and it's really rare now when I only read something in print. And so like I loved James Meunier's narration for Mike
so
Mullman's
good.
first three Protectors of Britannia books. Like it's so interesting, that really distinct Southwestern English accent that he had, and it was cozy and for me. And so I know Mike is not doing the audiobook for that anytime soon, but like I'm holding out for the audio, because if it eventually comes out, like I know I'll want to listen to that. I guess I could reread it, but I'm also very like, I feel at opportunity cost. I try not to do too much rereading, because my TBR mountain for new reads, like you, the quest to try to read as much as I can that I might end up liking, and so I try to be really pick my spots with my rereads. So yeah, I
Yeah,
I
I
I want to
struggle with
read
that
Desperate
too.
Dispatches, but like, oh man, I'm gonna just maybe wait for the audio, however long that takes. If Mike just tells me it's never gonna come, then I might give it a read. But then what I'll do, because I always have to have an audiobook going, because like when I go out on
Yeah.
walks or for the chores, and or driving in the car alone, and so I actually don't like splitting my attention between two different books at once. I love
Mm.
just living one plot, one world building, one style at a time. And so I will be, if I want to read it in print, and then I'll go outside, I'll just be switching off and pick up where I left off. And that's why it's a struggle for me to read anything that doesn't have an audiobook these days, because I don't want to
I
split and
gotcha.
read two books. Have you been splitting and having like a different audiobook going and a different print book? Is that's generally what most people do, and it seems to work for basically everyone.
So yeah, well, and because I've gotten there too, where audiobooks are just so easy and engaging. Sometimes it's hard to do other stuff. I've definitely gotten there, which still surprises me. But I do my normal is at least 3 books at a time, an audio, an ebook, and a
Ooh.
physical, all different.
Oh
Um,
wow.
I have tried a little bit more when possible, like when I have the audio or I can get like the audio or ebook from like my library or like one of the sources I have. I started doing all 3 formats sometimes, which is actually kind of nice because I get through a book a lot quicker, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but the last couple of months I have been all over the place where like I had like 6 or 7 books going at the same time here and there this month
Whoa.
because I was just kind of mood reading and I was
Yeah.
just having trouble getting into anything, and so I just would start something different. I'm
Yeah.
slowly
So you were
working my way
intentionally
back to
trying
it.
to trying to like find what was going to hit your mood. But do you feel like if you're focusing more on just one or two things, that your investment in those is a little higher? Like, cuz even when I'm not reading, like I like to kind of be thinking about the plots or the characters a little bit, and so I tend to really just like not splitting my attention between too many plots and books, cuz I feel like I will maximize my experience with each one if I don't if I'm not in
Yeah,
the middle of too many things at once.
I feel like it depends, but like just recently, the main book I was reading most of the month is "Shadow of a Smoking Mountain" by Howard Andrew Jones, which is book 3 in the Hanover Chronicles, which so good by the way.
Ooh.
Uh, and
Throw that
it's a
one on
tea arc.
TBR.
Oh, it's so good. It's the art's really good too. These are this is funny because these are trad pub, but I was this was like a self pub experience for me, because
Ooh.
the author saw my review for one of his other series and
Ooh.
then reached out, and he personally actually sent me these signed, which is
Oh,
super
nice.
awesome. Um, but I read his. I'm getting off topic now, but I read a trilogy of his, the Ringsworn trilogy, which was good. The first book was my favorite, and the second two I didn't like as much. And I kind of just explained in my review why I get what he was going for, and it just wasn't what I wanted. And he actually is like, I really like that. You didn't just like say like it's bad because it didn't do what I wanted. You said like explained why you understand. And I'm like yeah. But then this is like a whole nother level. So it's so good anyway. So like I had all these other things going, and I'm like, I got to the point where I didn't even want to listen to an audiobook because I just wanted this story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
also
Oh,
why I was
cool.
so slow,
Yeah.
because audio, if I would have been had spent more time audio this month, I would have got a lot more done. But I was so into this that I was just having trouble focusing on
Yes.
anything
Yes.
else.
Just going for
Uh,
the one story at a time. Sometimes that is okay to slow down the number of books you're reading. Absolutely. And
yeah.
maximizing your experience. RA, I hope you're having an excellent day as well. Heidi is enthusiastic about Hanovar. Mike's
Yes, she just
liking
read the
the
first one.
audiobook for Dark Town. And Heidi has 2 audios going and 1 physical. But she's like in a horse race, like waiting
Good
for one
battle.
to take off. Yeah. Love it. Love it.
That's
If
funny.
I what inevitably happens though with me is that something similar where if I'm doing multiple things at once, and this has happened every single time I try this, which is some fairly often. I try to become more of like a read multiple things at once person because I don't want to have to buy 2 versions of everything I ever read or have to find it at the library, which doesn't often happen for my Libby. And so when I try it, I always end up feeling more invested in one of them, and then I will just prioritize that almost fully, and then like the other one I'll have just stopped reading for a few days, and I'll already have like lost investment in it, and it'll be tough to get that one across the finish line for me. So I know for me, I just kind of accepted it and embraced it. I want to be a one book at a time person, and I am cruising for sales everywhere at Book Outlet, used bookstores. I always check if Libby has something that I'm gonna be reading. But Audible, I'm all over like every Audible sale. They do crazy, huge sales like periodically a couple times a year. So I'm looking for things on my TBR that are just a couple bucks, and so I will spend big chunks on Audible. But then when it's time to read something, I almost rarely ever have to spend a credit on it because I'll have
Yeah.
picked it up somewhere along the way. Uh, so, but I like the one at a time kind of thing. But that's cool that you can
I
split
do
between the
miss
different
it
formats.
at times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do miss it at times because I also miss just reading a series, just starting and finishing a
Yes.
series.
Yes.
Um, it's
Yes.
just so hard to justify because I have so many
Yeah.
things I
No, it
want to
is.
try.
It is. It
But
is. It is.
yeah,
Like, and especially with BookTube, like running a channel, I think compounds that issue. Because like before BookTube, like I took a few months and read all the Wheel of Time books, and that was a great few months where I was just in that one story. And I did the same thing for Malazan that year, and now I rarely do it like a full series binge.
yeah,
And I think spreading stuff out definitely it decreases the momentum a little bit or the investment, or you lose little details for memory, or at least I do. I wish I had a better memory for all these things. And even binging a series, like I'll lose little details from earlier books that come back around, and so but
I mean,
binging helps me like
yeah,
helps you pick up as much as possible.
for sure.
But with your reading, are you trying to get immersed? Does that happen where you're in a kind of flow and you have kind of entered the minds of the characters, the narrator, you're visualizing the world, you've left your kind of body and identity behind, basically? Is that what can happen for you when you read? I know some people really just kind of read more analytically, and they're kind of more analytically thinking about everything they're reading as they go, versus ones like me who hope to dissociate and kind of leave my mind behind. I'm kind of curious. Are you like where how you approach it?
That is a fantastic question, um, because I've done both, um, and that is for me the downside of running a booktube channel. I have a much harder time turning off the analytical part of my brain, which in
Ah,
my everyday life never turns off. I've been told by many people that I'm way too analytical in my life, and so sometimes it makes it hard to just kind of turn off that part of my brain and enjoy a story. But it does make
because
it
you're thinking
all the
about things
more
you might want to mention in like the review after.
yeah. Like I think
Yeah,
about like a review or like critiques or like this or that, or like I'll analyze how something's working, like little things, and especially, when I'm like when I then enter into like if I'm doing like beta reading or something like that too, which I don't do a ton of, but then like that's a completely different thing where I'm primarily like
yeah,
I'm analyzing.
yeah.
And so it's hard because one of the reasons why I fell in love with fantasy is because I could just, especially when, as a teenager, like that was my escape. I would just dive into the world, and that's why it's hard to recapture some of that magic that I felt
Sure.
reading when I was younger, because it's just like I don't usually get that deep into, but that's where I will say, like reading Wars of Light and Shadow, which was finally the only thing I think that could actually dethrone Wheel of Time. That just I lived Wheel of Time for so
Wow.
long; it was so hard. But Wars of Light and Shadow was where I even made a video. I'm like, hey guys. I'm gonna have less book reviews because I'm just gonna sit down and read the rest of this series. I no longer want to wait and do a book a month. Like I just got to read
Yes.
because I was so into it, and it's the world and the characters. It's just really sucked me in, and then getting to discuss each book with a group of people, including we talked about P.L. Stewart earlier, and with the author and Angie and Blaze, who runs a
Mhm.
podcast as well, and just like getting to chat about each book. It kind of reminded me too of like back when I would just get really into
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
So
And that's interesting. So that was, would you say it was legitimately more immersive than your average reading experiences these days? Because I find it interesting because I haven't tried her prose yet and haven't started that series, but famously, the prose is supposed to be kind of much more elevated and dense than typical. And so I'd just figure that maybe it's a less immersive style of read, but obviously that was not a barrier for you where like the prose might have been
yeah,
the perfect vehicle.
I feel like it is. It does take some getting used to because I did not fall in love until the second book. Um, but also I feel like binging the series when I'm already in that mode made it a lot easier because if
Yeah,
you
yeah,
just
yeah,
pick
yeah.
up one of her books, it's very different in style than what you're normally getting. And like even when I after binging and then like 6 months later reading the last book, like I started it, I'm like, oh, this is amazing, but I started really slow because I had to like
Yeah.
ease myself back in. And I love the writing style. It is just it's very unique and it's absolutely beautiful. And it's also
Yeah.
that's why I'm really excited. I hope that the whole series does get audio because I look forward greatly to listening to
Ooh.
it because the prose just screams to be read out loud. It really does to me.
Yeah.
And I've listened to the audio that there is, and it's very well done. Um, but yeah, just being able to just focus just on that. And when I read the last book, I read it over about a week, including I took a day off work because I needed to keep reading it
Yes.
because I could only cut
Yes.
out so much sleep. And I just like I did almost nothing but read that book. And that's something too. Like I miss those days. That was me with like when Stormlight was coming out. I would just read those
Yeah.
books over like a couple of days of just like focused reading. And
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
do that as much anymore too. So it kind of brought me back, but also it's just a really
Nice.
really made it very immersive for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I've had a few of those moments throughout my life. I could probably count them on one hand where I was really like waiting for those release days, like for the last bunch of Harry Potter books growing up. Those were always fun. Um, and then for Stormlight 4, I binged the first 3 Stormlight ones that were out, and then I was waiting a few years for 4. And that one I I think was probably working from home then and was able to just like read most of the time. and and the same thing for Battleground when that came out with the Dresden Files. So it's so fun when you can look forward to that new release like a kid again.
So I have a question for you. Speaking of Stormlight and speaking of audio, did you do Stormlight on audio?
So I did it fully in print the first time through, and I raced through. I was actually going out on an international trip when I had gotten into fantasy again with Mistborn. And I was like, I brought the first two mass markets for Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. I thought that was going to get me through the trip, but I finished those so quickly that I just like bought Oathbringer on Kindle for my phone, and I read Oathbringer just on my phone, so into it, and then not too long after I did like the Dresden audios, I was on like a Dresden kind of, what's that called? A hangover. I think just binging Dresden for over months. I was just like, oh, that was such an intense experience, and I loved it so much. Like I wanted something that I knew I was already familiar with, so I went back and reread Stormlight audio. So I did them fully by print and then fully by audio.
Okay. Did you like the audio?
I did. I loved it, and so that was my first exposure to Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, and I loved the pair for that, and I then ended up really loving them for Wheel of Time as well. So they worked like a charm for me. Now that was odd for you, right? Because had you listened to them, or no? Have you done Stormlight in audio yet at all?
So I no, because when the books were coming out, I didn't really do audio. I did listen to the whole Wheel of Time. I did a audio reread there, but I recently I'd had the audiobook on hold for my library for like 6 months because it took forever, and I got it, and I did establish this month I was really having trouble focusing on anything, but I couldn't get into it, and I'm like, I've read The Way of Kings 3-4 times in print. Love the book. I'm like, I couldn't get into it, and I don't know why. So I didn't know if my brain didn't like the audio or if it was just even that was just not clicking at the time. So I was just curious.
That's fascinating because you're familiar with them as narrators. No, Mike Kramer, Kate Redding,
And I
I
liked
love them as narrators. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where like I like the narrators a lot. I like the book. I don't know what didn't compute, but for some reason I just am like, this is not working for me, and I don't know why. So I ended up DNFing. Granted, I've read it several times. So I don't know if that counts as DNFing.
But you're really looking forward to Wind and Truth then.
I'm less excited than I was for the early books, but I'm still excited to read it. I liked Rhythm of War more than most people, apparently.
Yeah.
It was 4 stars for me, but I had much less problems.
Okay. Yeah, no, I pretty much just loved all the Stormlight books like to the max. And I could tell you definitely you read a little bit more analytically than I do. So I rate books based on my very analytical, scientifically calibrated grip to the page-o-meter, and that's the way. When I feel like I am just like as gripped as can be, I don't want to put it down when I'm reading, and when I'm not reading, I don't want to be doing whatever it is. I just want to get back to the book. Like, so when that's the case, that's when I know it's 5 stars. If I felt like legitimate like emotions that I noticed feeling, and I was emotionally moved, like that'll rocket it up to like a high 5 stars for me, where it's like, oh, that's a 10 out of 10 book. I was gripped and it pulled real emotion. That's what I am really after. And so that's my very scientific rating system. And then it's almost like a yes or no proposition for me. Like if I'm into the book and gripped and immersed, then it's a good chance I'll give it 5 stars. But if I thought I was just like, sometimes I like books, but I can tell I'm not so gripped where I like, oh, I can't be doing anything else right now besides reading, and I'll take longer to finish the book. Like then I know like, okay, that's probably 4 star. And then with books where like I'm just like I can't get immersed at all, and I'm just like bouncing off the writing style, or I find plot holes that I just characters that feel wooden and or just 2-dimensional, and I'm really noticing these things, then then that's like the no part of the yes no proposition, and it's like, oh god, this book's so not working for me. Like it's like in the 2 to 3 star range, or if I find things like particularly horrendous, like the 1 star. But I like with those books, like the Stormlight books, I'm just able to be immersed and invested in the story, and so just like easy 5 stars. Like I don't even have to think about it sometimes. And then crazy books come along where I just have an experience that I just have never had before. So like you, I know, have been getting into this author as well. When I read Guy Gavriel Kay for the first time, and I used to think that I wasn't a real like prose person, like that I was just an equal opportunity employer for any kind of prose until I had the emotional response to Song for Our Bone that I did. I couldn't believe what was happening to me as I was reading this book, and I was noticing so many just amazing lines as I was reading, and it wasn't really like taking me out of my immersion. It was just like adding to the experience. It's like, oh my god, that was so beautifully put, or what a poignant image or thought that he gave the character here. And I was able to be like a tiny bit analytical, but still be just like fully immersed in the events. And I was so just there for the whole like last act and the climactic section. And 2 more books with Guy Gavriel Kay, Lines of Alrasan and Brightness Long Go. And I think he's easily like now a favorite author of mine. And I am now maybe thinking I'm becoming a bit more of a prose snob, or Guy Gavriel Kay is making me into one. And I can tell like certain prose things, like in the Poppy War, in Cradle, in Brian Staveley's books, like they annoyed me to the point where I think it prevented my immersion. And so sometimes I can I know that like the writing style is just not for me. Other times it's not necessarily the writing. Like with Mark Lawrence's books, like I DNF'd Red Sister, but I thought the writing was well done. But I don't know, I just couldn't get into that book. But sometimes I think it is clunky prose. But like I don't know, Guy Gavriel Kay, I'm worried a little bit that he's gonna turn me into a prose snob. So
I'm
I
jealous
never
of your
had an
hardcover.
experience. Oh,
I have the
yeah.
paperback.
Yeah, I read from that one actually, and then after I sought this one out online after it became my favorite book ever.
I was gonna say, so I think you feel for Song for a Bone the way I feel about Lions of Alrasan.
Ooh. Oh wow! Did
Because
you have
this
an
is
emotional experience with that one?
this was my first K as well. So I read this one
Yeah,
first, and then I read Song for a Bone as number 2.
yeah.
This immediately became one of my all-time favorite. It tied for number 1 of all-time favorite novels. And I just this was another one too where I was so immersed in it immediately, and like it is masterfully written. It's like the writing and the prose and everything is so great, but it like almost didn't even matter because I was just so absorbed into the storytelling, and
Yeah,
I just I had such an amazing experience with that. And
I'm
don't get
so
me wrong, I
curious.
loved Song for a Bone too,
Yeah,
but
I feel the
Lions was
same way about
just
Lions of Our Sun. I loved it. It's like one of the most perfect books I've ever read, but I feel a particularly special attachment to this one. I am so curious if we had swapped which K book we read
right.
first, if we would have had like the same experience with the other book that we didn't have ourselves, like because and Zamar, if he's still here, he just read his first K book with A Brightness Long Ago, and it was super special for him. Like I loved it, but it didn't have the exact same impact that Song for a Bone had for me. And I think there might be
I'm
something
torn.
to the first experience of an author, like Mistborn, that first Mistborn book for me, like that's a really special one. My first Sando book, that was my first adult fantasy read, which is also makes it special. But like, and this one, like, I wonder if I think it was partly the fact that it was the first time, because falling into his rhythm and the way that he wrote so elegantly but simply, and the types of like political and cultural world building he did, and the conflicts that he built, and the the character relationships and conflicts. I've seen a lot of echoes in a lot of these things between the 3 books I've read of his, and so I think he works on a lot of the same
Yeah.
kind of character tropes and plot tropes and things. And so I think there probably is something to the first K book you read is gonna stand out a little extra.
So I was gonna say the same thing because there are definitely some, and they're masterfully done. So it's not like it's a bad thing. But there are definitely some similarities. But see, I'm torn now because I was gonna read Takana next. Because Joanna I was following her order
Yeah,
unintentionally. A lot of people had recommended me Lions to start with, and then she was raving about Song for Our Bone and such or that. But then yeah, I have almost every book he has, if not every
yeah,
book he
yeah.
has. I can't be
Oh
missing
man,
many.
oh
I've been
man,
collecting them for
Brightness is so
years.
good. Brightness is so good. Like that is just a perfect book.
Well, it's a lot
So
shorter, so maybe I will do that one next.
yeah, that one's much shorter. I for years was planning to read Tigana since that was the book that was like definitely the most famous of his for a while in the community. And I saw Daniel Green read it and review it years ago and rave about it on the channel, and that was like one of my longest TBR veterans that I kept on pushing down because like Kay was one of those authors that like intimidated me a little bit, and so I kept on pushing it down, um, and man, now starting with Song for a Bone like that was the best place to start for me because yeah, that was so personally resonant. But man, Brain Long Go, amazing. Lions, also amazing. Like I love how he did this whole book with Lions of Valor filled with so much uh, pathos and conflict and tension, but without like a real caricatured human villain. Like I loved that the tension came from all these other more subtle places than like a human villain, which is so prevalent in definitely in fantasy and even in
Oh yeah.
Pacific. And the way that there was still so much tension within Lions of Our and you cared so much about all the different characters and their outcomes. You wanted everyone to have a happy ending. Man, it was so great. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's yeah. Oh my gosh. You're making me just want to not read what I'm supposed to read this month and go back and read something else by Kay because it's very rare, to pick up the first book you read by an author and have that sort of reaction.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's happened very few times, for me where I'm just like, you read a book and you're like, I'm gonna read everything they've ever published. You know, that was me with well, I would say Robert Jordan, but he didn't write that many other things. And I'm not reading his Western romances. Um, but but like I did my first Sanderson was Warbreaker because that was the new book when it was announced he was going to finish Wheel of Time.
Mhm.
So I read that and then uh, either Way of Kings or Mistborn. I don't remember which next. But did that. And so then I kept up with him on release. Gianni Wirtz was one where, I got into her and I'm like, I'm going to read everything. And I have read every solo book of hers. I haven't read the Empire trilogy she did with Feist yet, but I've read every solo book she's written at this point. Um, and so it's nice it's sad too, because I want more immediately. Like she's still writing,
Yeah.
but I want more now. Uh,
Yeah.
but so Guy Gavriel Kay is now that author that I look
Yes.
forward so much to reading every single book
Yep.
that he's written.
Yep.
And I'd collected a lot of them, but I've got even more lately. And I just, yeah, it's so hard to pick where to go because I hear great things about so many of his books. And from what I've heard too, is none of them are like bad. I think it was the Library Ladder said that um, Kay's books range from truly great to merely very good. Like
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
low
That's a
end for
great
Kay.
line. I love
Just
his
merely
his
very
guy.
good.
I love his Guy Gavrier tier list. That's a great video. Um, and yeah, I'm very protective over A Song for a Bone. Like when I watch the tier lists and it's not at the top, like I feel like what are they missing? But
I'm the same way with Lions. I just
yeah,
Song for Our Bone was fantastic, but yeah, I don't know. It's just Lions of Our Son. I could talk about it for days. I loved everything about the book. It's beautiful. It's the first book that made me be like, okay, maybe a love triangle can be done well, which still surprises me with it too.
Yes, done
But
so well, so well. That like love triangles can be incredible plot devices. Like I thought that was perfectly done, just really elegantly executed, and um, yeah, I'm right with you there. Uh, oh, John, thanks. I think he sees the globe up there. Nice, yeah. Thanks for stopping by, John. But like I'm feeling the same way with GGK. Like I look at his bibliography, I'm like, oh, why isn't it longer? Like why aren't there a lot more books? Because I wanna be able to just savor them continually and not run out. Because I've already done 3, and uh, our GGK kind of buddy reading group might be doing Sarantine Mosaic in the next couple months, and so
let me know about that.
I oh yeah. If you want to get in on that for some, we've been doing those book chats. Um, oh yeah, you can totally join that group with Zamar in there, and Chris Navo. Dark. We had a great chat on Brightness Long Ago, and I find when I'm heading towards a book chat, I haven't done that too often, but I've been doing it with the Realm of the Elderlings. Colin's been busy over the summer, so we've solved that. We'll probably be doing Fool's Quest very soon, in the start of September. But when I know I'm going to be doing a book chat with people, I think I read a little bit more intentionally, go a little bit more slowly, try to flag impactful lines that I might want to bring up during the chat, and it does enrich my enjoyment, I think, and I'm more kind to the book. Like I'm looking for the things that I'm going to want to gush about or discuss and dive deep into further. And I think when I'm just reading a book just purely on my own, I might rush through it a little bit to try to get through it. And I like
I
that
see that.
knowing you're going to be having a book chat can help to slow you down or look for what you can appreciate. It maybe be kinder to certain books that you might not have been like the first couple Rainwild books. Like I ended up really liking those, and I had low
Oh,
expectations,
did you?
but
Okay.
I like those first 2. Unfortunately, I did not like the last 2. I was like, I'm gonna be the big outlier and just love the whole Rainwild Chronicles. But yeah, that did not happen. I got to the end and was like, oh, I so wished like Hub just made a trilogy out of this and trimmed the fat and didn't lean into the YA aspects, like
Could have been
like
a
a lot of the
duology.
yeah. Shorten that up. I really did like the journey plot at the beginning, but man, did not end up loving
The
that sub series.
I I won't even actually I don't think there's anybody in the chat that's going to get me in trouble whenever I talk about Realm of the Elderlings, but I'm still bitter. I think I'm always going to be bitter because through the first 9 books, just that moved it to my second favorite series of all time. And it dropped multiple places when I finished the last 7 books. And I'm still
Ooh,
mad. I'm
ooh,
just
yeah. That's
the
that's interesting. A lot of people, I don't know. I've seen. I feel like consensus is more towards the final, like Rainwald's is a blip, and the final trilogy is like just a continuation of the massive quality. And so far, I'm there because I loved Fool's Assassin. I loved Fool's
because
Assassin.
okay, so I am an outlier, I will say, but Fool's Assassin has a few major flaws, but it's just so good you don't care. Uh, and the ending of that book, the final passage chills.
Mm.
Absolutely, like phenomenal. But the second book, the flaws get a lot harder to overlook. And then
Oh no.
the third book is terrible in my opinion.
Oh
It's
wow, Pete's with you there. Last book is my
it's
least favorite book.
yeah,
Well, I will hold out hope that I am going to fall in the Jake Bishop camp where it's like a favorite book of all time, because
you're
I
still
love
gonna
strong
cry.
endings. I like to be left on that note where that final book just like was one of my favorites of the series and just delivered that amazing ending, like Wheel of Time, Memory of Light. Like what an amazing last finale of a book for
Yeah.
me, and ended so strong to end on that high note of a long series. it feels like it is important for me personally. Like I really want my investment to build and build throughout and to end on that high note. So I do hope I do not have a similar experience.
Yeah. I'm 100% in sync with Pete. I don't own the
Mm.
last 7 books. I got rid of them.
Oh wow.
For me, on rereads, Fool's Fate is the end of the series for me. Um, so I just yeah, I and a lot of people are fine with it. It's and kind of like you said, you focus more on just getting absorbed into the story.
Yeah.
And so I think you might have to try really hard to turn off the analytical part of your
Mm.
brain because there's something very specific that's just so clumsily done that it just I couldn't get
Oh
over it.
no.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Oh, that's a
the
shame.
very
Yeah.
ending hits you on all the emotional notes. It's got the classic hobgut punch. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like she's gonna
Yeah.
get you.
Yeah.
So there is still some good. It's not like it's just all bad, but it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
I I just for a series that meant so much to me, it's
Yeah.
because I was so invested in it. That's why it
Yeah.
made me
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
bitter. So it's
Yep.
yeah. Yep. And
That
yeah,
makes
oh God,
sense. It
Pete,
makes
we are
sense.
so in sync, Pete. We are so in sync.
Oh man.
Until he said
Um,
love to the rain wilds. Not so much there, but on the last
nice,
trilogy,
nice.
very in sync.
Oh, hey, Andrew's in the house. Welcome, welcome. Um, and
Also agrees with me here.
and John, I'm glad you like the bookshelf. I wish I could remember where they came from. They're not IKEA though. They were a gift from my mom, and they're nice. They're really nice wooden shelves. They're so heavy. I had to bring these up in the boxes from downstairs, and that was tough.
They look very
And
solid.
then, oh yeah, yeah, they're great. Um, Andrew also likes Hob 1 to 9. I'm intrigued. I
That's
also want to see what she does outside of the series. Like, I want to see what Soldier Sun series is like, what her previous Megan
I've
Lindholm books
meant
are like.
I've meant to get to that, but I'm still angry and I haven't. I also
Yeah.
still haven't read I still have it, but I haven't read The Inheritance, which is a short story collection of
I have
both
that
Hobb
too.
and Lindholm.
Oh, that's a
But
much nicer copy than the like seemingly Amazon print on demand one I got.
oh,
Um,
UK paperbacks are the
ooh,
best consistent way to get the series. I found.
yeah. I Yeah, my copy is not calling out to be read because it is printed a little off and it's
Mhm.
not on even good paper. Yeah, but I gotta give that one a read. I think there's live ship adjacent stories in there, and live ship is one of my favorite like single series of my life, and so I gotta do anything related to live ship. Um,
So I do think Life Ship is objectively the best.
yeah.
Although I much prefer Farseer and Tawny Man
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah.
personally. Uh, I connected with those books a lot more, I feel like. Although objectively, I don't think you can say that Live Ship Traders is not the objectively best like written trilogy. Um, in a lot of ways. Although I found I didn't notice it as much, but I found a lot of people have noted that the prose isn't as good, which makes sense because it's not supposed to be. Because Fitz is a trained scribe, and he's the one
Mm,
writing the Fitz books
yeah.
in the first person. The life ship is third person, so it's not written in that way. But I didn't notice that as much. But that is an interesting one. But
Oh, interesting to think about. Yeah. Uh, did you agree with me that the ending of the Wheel of Time was
yeah,
really strong? Oh, that
I
was a
have
thrilling book.
been yeah. I mean, I've been I know that, Sanderson I think did as good a job as anyone could have done. I 100% believe that, and I really loved the end of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Also,
100%.
why
So
does everyone talk about the
mine's
big
up there.
last chapter called the final battle as if like, oh, I finally reached the final battle? The battle was going on for like a lot longer before than that chapter arrived. Like a lot of this
People,
book is the final battle. It's not just that
yeah,
chapter. That's
people were
yeah.
so mad about that though, and I don't get it. Like, I didn't think it was that
You're
big of
mad
a
about what?
deal.
That it was
A lot of people were really mad that the chapter was that long because they,
Oh,
I
I
guess,
love it.
felt
Oh, go for it.
well.
I wish it was longer. I wish the whole book was the final battle, like one chapter, the final battle. That go big or go home. Would love that. Yeah, I don't understand
What's
that that was a complaint.
people, I guess, who feel like they have to finish a chapter before they can be done reading for that session. But I'm like, we'll never
True,
read
true.
Terry Pratchett, I guess.
Sure, I do
But
like
yeah,
short chapters. Like reading The Expanse. I just finished The Mercy of Gods, and like James S. A. Corey, that duo love short chapters, and there's something so fun too about just those short chapters and just those POV switches that come with them, and those cliffhangers at the end of the chapters. Like, love that kind of thriller pacing as well. But sinking into a nice, huge, epic chapter like the final last battle, is that what it's called? Last battle.
the last battle, yeah.
And or Egatan and in the Bone Hunters. Like, man, there's nothing like one of those epic sequences that just goes on and is so well executed.
It's I'm okay with both because sometimes short chapters are really refreshing. Like the physical book I'm reading right now is really short chapters, and so it's very easy to feel like I'm making progress. Versus one of the other reasons I felt like I was so slow is the Hanuvar books. They only have like 10 to 15 maybe chapters, but there are like sub chapters in each one. So you're reading basically like each chapter is like a novella almost. And so it takes a while to make progress, but then it's also so easy to stop after each one because it's a little episodic and it's really good. But it's yeah. I've not read The Expanse. Mostly if you see Andrew's comment, is why I haven't read The Expanse. But
Well,
he's
I
convinced me
think
I won't like them.
you don't have to go too far. I'm not going to say like, go 4 books. You get a sense of the style pretty quickly through book 1. I think it's a good representative book, and so you could just try out book 1 to see if the world building intrigues you and if the writing voice appeals. But man,
Fair.
I was super impressed. I think they kind of leveled up in a lot of ways with the Mercy of Gods. Um, this was just utterly gripping, just outstanding, blew me away. Like, talk about like go big or go home books. Like when sci-fi really goes for it, like it is so cool. The stuff that can happen, especially early on, like almost to shape the premise, initial like inciting incidents in the premise. When I've loved a lot of sci-fi series that go so big, like with the Three Body Problem trilogy, Children of
I still
Time
read that
books.
too.
Like
And that.
I love it when authors go so like as big as just like oh man, so dramatic. Andrew, what is that? What is Titan Hoppers? Never heard of that.
Rob J. Hayes, I think. I have not read it.
Shad. Yeah, there's like Leviathan Wakes just has 2 POV characters. It's like an alternating POV structure where each chapter switches off. So if you didn't like either of those, that book's gonna be a struggle. I liked both, thankfully. James Holden and Miller, the detective who's down on his luck. Yeah, but it's okay. It's good if you don't like, if you're not interested in trying out a series or author. Like with so many to try, I like having a few that are kind of off my TBR. Like for a while, Anthony Ryan was one that I was like, I'm not convinced I'm gonna like his books. Like I see lots of conflicting things. Like and then finally I heard Nikki, the obsessive bookseller, praising his high fantasy dragon series, the Draconis Memoria ones. I'm
Oh,
like,
okay.
okay, I see those on Book Outlet. I'll put those on the TBR, but it's kind of nice to like not put every author on the TBR, like to keep some off, because we're not going to be able to get to all of it. So like, why not just give yourself a guilt-free break on a couple?
I have also almost, if not every book Anthony Ryan has ever written, mostly because of Book Outlet, because I kept finding them there.
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
read
yeah.
Bloodsong, loved Bloodsong, have not read any other books he's written yet. And it's because everybody says the second 2 books in that trilogy aren't nearly as good. And so I'm like, but I want to finish that before I read something else. And
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
feel like
And
I've
sometimes
ended up
that
not
wisdom of the
reading.
crowds, yeah, I'm with you. Sometimes the wisdom of the crowds on that, the consensus that builds, ends up being really right for us. Like, I wish I'd waited on reading the Lightbringer series until more people had read the 5th book, and that consensus really built that the series just kind of completely shat the bed with the final couple books, because I that was the
I liked it.
consensus, and then I loved the beginning, and then I was with the consensus on thinking like book 4 just meandered and was this unimpactful side quest, and then book 5 just completely petered out into a whimper of an ending. So like that one, I wish I'd waited for that consensus to build, like the Anthony
See,
Ryan one.
that is an interesting one because there are there are a couple of series like that I know that were really popular and a lot of people didn't like them. Um, but I still have my hardcovers somewhere. Oh, they're over here. Um, I liked it. I do. There's one particular thing I wish would have been done differently in the last book, and it's probably not the big thing that you're thinking of either. But
Hmm.
I thought it. I really enjoyed the series overall. It went some very unexpected things. I do think that if he wrote it again today, he probably would have done some things differently because there's definitely some things that are a bit convoluted. But it's just like for me, I really loved the magic and then the
Oh,
world
I loved
and
it. I love the
a lot of
magic,
the
but
characters too.
I think the magic was so much more prevalent in like the first couple books, in just like how often it showed up in the scenes and in the problem solving characters had to do, and I felt like that really tailed off, and it felt more just kind of random and haphazardly strewn in those later books, and uh but yeah, I had some issues with some of the major kind of plot decisions he made towards the end, where
A lot of
I
people did.
but but the thing is though, I was kind of like book 4 took my investment away, and like I've been talking about, I'm like an all or nothing reader. Like the switch
That's
is
fair.
either turned on and I'm in it, or it's off. And I think book 3 like was steadily decreasing my investment, and then book 4 did not pick it back up. It just like it had been waning for so many hundreds of pages and hours that like I started book 5 and I was kind of out of it, and so there wasn't much that he could have done at that point, because I had lost my investment, and so it's almost impossible for me to get back in when I lose it like that. So I did not give book
I
5, I think,
gotcha.
a fair shot. I think I was speed reading through a lot of it, and
Mm.
then like the climactic beats just did not hit at all for me.
And
But
I think
yeah,
um, for me, I binged the whole series at once. And I think that helped my experience. I think that it's a series that if you're reading it slower over time or like reading at release, that might have been a little rough for sure. And like I don't know what speed you did, but that was back before BookTube. Is actually I finished it not that long before I think because I ended up doing a video about it I think, but
oh,
um, I just read the whole thing and I really enjoyed it. And like he did some things that were kind of but I think it worked really well. And there's some series like that where they're controversial, usually for good reasons, but that like I still found myself really enjoying because the other one, which people have all of the complaints for the most part are completely fair, but the Demon Cycle by Peter B. Free Brett never
yeah,
gets talked about.
that's one. I bought the first book back when I was just getting into adult fantasy, and I was seeing that name thrown around online a lot, along with Brent Weeks and Sanderson and Jim Butcher. And so I just was browsing in Barnes and Noble and picked that up, and then I didn't get to it immediately, and then I started hearing the chorus of like the series went downhill, and then lost all motivation to read it. So
And
is that
so
not what happened for you?
this series sticks the landing so hard. It's like
Wow, really?
actually
I've never.
really, really well.
Maybe a
Most
lot of
people
people that
didn't
they
they
don't
didn't
get
make
to
it
the
through.
end.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it because I don't think you can get to the ending and be like, that was so disappointing. I'm like, it was a great ending. It made so much sense. It delivered on so much and it was very satisfying. But usually a lot of it is people read the first couple and it's more so it's the content that people are like, okay, this is way overused, which it is. Um, like this is it's funny because if you talking about the negatives of the series, it sounds like something I would never pick up because I don't like a lot of sexual content in books, and there's that and violence a lot in the first few to a lot of the characters, and I could have definitely done without that. But it's one where it's just like the world being set up and the narrative, despite the things that I wasn't a huge fan of. And like this isn't a top 10 series for me, but it's a very good series with a really great ending.
Yeah.
And so it's yeah, I but it's another one too. I read them mostly in a row. Um, and it's just like, yeah, there's some of these series
Okay,
too.
man, you're getting me
They're
to put
good.
it back on the TBR. I hope I still have my book one. I'm gonna have to look through my shelves and see if I still have it, or if I ended up selling it back to a used bookstore,
It's
thinking
very
I
much
wasn't
worth
gonna
a
read
read.
it. Oh man,
It's
okay, it's
very
back
much
on the
worth a read.
TBR. It's back on the
But see,
TBR, the Niko
you
TBR.
got you got Shad saying he felt the middle books were a little bit weaker. Book 4 was probably his least favorite, but the ending was
Hmm.
really good. So,
I do see this a lot
well,
with like series that are this mid-size of like 5-ish books or 6 books. How is this one 5? 5
5.
books?
Yeah,
Like
you're gonna
like
have weak
series in
points.
this length, yeah, like they tend to, not please everyone with all their books. The books, the series that are just like so consistent throughout are really rare, I think, where there's not going to be like a single weak book. Um
That's why everybody does trilogies.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
It's harder to
Uh
keep an audience through a longer series. And, that's you don't see a lot of really long series anymore because A, publishers aren't as into it, but you have to basically have like a built-in audience to get away with a long series. And I mean, even Sanderson, who's got like the biggest built-in audience there is these days, even he has a lot of people like, hey, like his books are too long. Like somebody should tell him, like, don't just write literally everything. A lot of people feel that way. And I'm sure that there will be some drop off as that series goes along. But like you see with Wheel of Time too, where like there are some weaker books in the Wheel of Time, but it's a phenomenal series. And I feel like it's especially now though, because if I'm reading a series and I'm not like super into it, or like I get to like a really weak book, it's harder for me to justify continuing. And so I'm really glad I read some series when I did. Because I don't know if I would have continued them. Like the biggest example, if I started Malazan today,
yeah.
and had the experience I had when I actually read it, I would have DNF'd it very early on. And I like because I read. It took me a year to read Malazan, and I was not reading anything else at the time. That's how much I
Yeah, so you
hated
were just
reading it.
yeah, you were more
Yeah,
forgiving. I was the same way back when I didn't have the TBR mountain. Yeah.
yeah. It's like for I basically like I'd hate the first half of every book, and then I'd be really hooked for the second half. But then it would start over. I would hate the first half of the next book, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it took me so long to get through. And like it is a phenomenal series. It's not one of my personal top 10 favorites, but there's still so many plot lines and scenes from that series that I remember as fresh as if I read them yesterday. I read it years
Yeah.
ago. There's so many just amazing things in the book, and I think that's what tells you how it truly is great. Even though
Yeah,
I had a
yeah,
rough
I
time
I
reading
felt
it, so
felt the exact same way in terms of it's not a personal, like, top favorite, but some absolutely spectacular, memorable sequences strewn throughout. Like, I
mhm.
can like, I didn't love a lot of Reaper's Gale, but, the Beak storyline and some moments around Beak, like, out of almost all the books and series I've read, like, just some like a spectacular moment there, like that I'm gonna hopefully keep with me for my lifetime. Like Erickson can be so impactful like that, even if you're not in love with everything he's doing, which
Yeah,
is cool. It's why it's good to be patient and give things a chance. And I should be try to not have the on off switch, but be comfortable more in like the middle. But speaking of the on off switch, have you have you t- have you turned
oh
the
no.
egg decatur like in Willy Wonka, the bad egg, and dropped it down the chute? Like, have there been any, we'll say, trad pub authors or series that have gone down the chute where they just you bounced off them and you thought the writing was not up to snuff, or the characters just poorly done and drawn, or uh, yeah. And Andrew, one of my worst reading decisions in my life was finishing this series. I I didn't. I like the writing in book one. The thing is, I was engaged enough by the plotting of book one, where I'm like, I'll just keep going. And bad choice. I hated those last 2 books. One of the biggest slogs of my life. Um, but are there any bad eggs for you in the trad pub realm?
So we buddy read that together, and I think we fed off each other's hate because we I finished it. I regret it. It's one of
Just book
my
one.
least, just book one. Yeah, that was one
Oh,
of my least
so
favorite
you
books
didn't.
I've ever read.
So you didn't
Yeah,
slog through the rest like I did.
no, but
Oh
I
god.
used to pretty much never DNF. Um,
Yeah.
I've let myself DNF more. Still, the worst book I've ever read, and I've been told that I'm exaggerating, but I don't personally feel that I am. By the like 3 people who've read it besides me, granted. The worst book I've ever read, it is Tradpump. It is called Rhapsody by Elizabeth Hayden. And it's the first of a series. And I recently found a booktuber who loves the series, and I'm so confused and I'm desperate to find out why. Because we have similar taste on some
Yeah.
things, and
Yeah.
I'm so confused. Jonathan Cohn, if you know him,
Oh,
somebody recently
I
pointed
watched
him
this
out.
channel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he loves this series, and I don't get it. But
But Pete,
I'm really curious.
how did you feel about it, Pete? Um,
It's So, like, it was literally that's the first book I ever DNF'd on purpose. I have to say on purpose because I ended up kind of DNFing something before, but it's the first book I ever DNF'd on purpose. And because it's quite a long book, and it's just like so incredibly slow and boring. And oh God, Pete. So yeah, but it literally it's and it's not even like it's sold as a romance because the author's female and the main character's a female who's attractive. It's not a romance. But it's just like it had some interesting ideas. But like it starts off immediately with some just weird scenes that probably are going to come back, but they didn't to the point I got. Then it has like the most mustache twirly character who just implies violence against children just because as an easy way to be like he's a villain. And then we spend like 400 pages traveling through a tunnel. And I'm not
oh
kidding.
no.
Like 400 pages traveling through a tunnel.
Oh
But
no.
then this is sort of a spoiler, but I don't think anyone's going to read this.
It's
Do you
fine. The
Okay.
mustache you turn at mustache twirly villain for no reason. Like that's one of my least. That's one of my real huge personal pet peeves.
And they literally, it doesn't even matter because he's barely in the book. So like there was no reason to do that. But so I don't know if it wasn't 400 pages is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was hundreds. It was like the middle like, 50% of the book at least was there. And there's a plot point where she's already very attractive, but there's a plot point where she becomes just like irresistibly attractive, and so every time they pass men, they just try to attack her because they just can't help themselves because she's so beautiful, which come on. But then, completely unrelated, what actually made me DNF the book is there is a new POV suddenly in like the last third of this book. And somebody is walking and they like, I don't, there's some sort of assassin or thief or something because they have a cloak that makes them like hard to see and somewhat invisible, but not perfectly. And they're in a crowd, and a pickpocket mistakes their testicles for a coin purse and tries to snatch them. And I'm just like, I'm done. I'm just done. I'm
Oh
done.
my god.
Pete, you are correct.
Has
But
has Hayden written any like popular series? Is that I've heard
I
that
don't
name, but I can't place it.
I don't know. It's like there are several books in this series, and like the art is great. And there are fans of the
When was
series.
that
Like they
from?
do exist. Um oh, it's probably 90s. I feel like I'm
Oh,
allowed to
okay.
hate it because um I
You you like a
I
lot of
love me
niche like
some
90s female written fantasy. Yeah.
I too. I've joked with a couple of people because like I was talking to somebody and they made a comment that they feel like so I guess the first book was 99, so that it was mostly early 2000s.
That's
Um
practically the 90s though. That
I mean it still counts.
Yeah.
The Symphony of Ages, that's what it's called. There's the Rhapsody trilogy, and then there's more books in that world. She's actually written a fair amount of stuff, apparently. But most of it's in this world, so I'm not going to read
Yeah. Yeah.
it. But I don't know.
Oh,
I
I
don't
love that.
know.
I love hearing people's bad experiences, and I think we can often everyone go out of our way to avoid talking about our negative experiences, and I think it's good to get a sense of someone's taste and just to
Yeah.
be warned away from something. Like I have so much to read, like it's I'm glad I'm warmed away from this, and like I'm likely not going to like it, and so now I don't have to suffer through it myself. Like
I definitely
I
don't
had a
recommend
similar experience with Skullsworn by Brian Staveley. Like the
So
the
I've
book,
been
it feels like it was written as like a joke by him. Like it's so bad that you almost feel like, and this is coming after I'd read all 3 of his Unhewn Throne trilogy books and felt they were mediocre. This was like if they were just mediocre middle of the pack fantasy books, like Skullsworn was just one of the worst books I've ever read. Like so much worse. And to see the buzz around, like Patrick like raving about it, 5 stars, and just like the worst conceived plot and situation I've ever seen in books. And then I railed against this book, and Kyle from Read by Kyle was like, "Oh, there's no way it's that bad." And then he read it, and I think
so
hated
it's
it
your
even
fault.
more. I hated it.
Yeah, I've heard him
hated it
talk
even
about
more
it.
than I did. And because he thought, no, you're just ranting and raving. This is ridiculous. And he hated it even more. But people like that book, and I cannot understand. I can understand it sometimes. Like I bounced off the first binding, and that was just not for me in any way, shape, or form. But I can totally see people getting swept up in that, and I can see it. I just cannot. I cannot with Skullsword. There is nothing in there that I think could grab someone in any kind of positive reading experience. That the Poppy War is an interesting case because Samara's talking about. I think that was a book that just hit the zeitgeist at a perfect moment, and that got a lot of buzz because I think it kind of overlapped the YA and adult kind of fantasy communities, and kind of hit at a time when the community was wanting to read less things from male white authors, and then it hit with some younger booktubers like Daniel Green, and like talked it up a lot, so much buzz, and once there's just buzz, like it's almost like a self-perpetuating machine. But I think the fact that it has not had staying power is more indicative of the real quality of the series than the initial buzz.
Yeah. It's what's funny because actually Daniel Green, me disagreeing with him and not having a platform to say my opinions is one of the reasons I started a booktube channel. Uh,
Yes.
I and nothing against him. We just have very different taste.
Yeah.
But like Patrick, if Patrick loves a book, I'm not interested in trying it for the most part because also very different taste. Patrick has loved a lot of stuff I don't like and not liked stuff that I love. And there is some overlap, but it's like, finding out the booktubers who you agree with is just as important as finding the people who
Yeah.
have very different taste.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I can see, I'm like, okay, this person who usually likes things that I really don't loves this, I'm gonna probably not want to pick this up as much. That's why I just joked. I did the first Murder Bot on audio and it was fine, but Daniel Green loved it so much. I'm like, I'm never reading this series because it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, that was an experience that I had. And back when I was new to BookTube, his stuff was everywhere. And so I'd see him recommend stuff and try some stuff. And I do have, though, I have a lot of unpopular opinions about the Tradpub books that I don't like, including some that you really like.
Keep going. I love it.
I don't like First Law. I think it's very overrated. Not a fan of Song of Ice and Fire. Although I feel like to be fair, I should reread that as an adult and see if I've changed my mind. I know the stuff that annoyed me is still going to annoy me, but maybe I'll appreciate some stuff a little more. But like those are two of the really big ones.
Yeah.
I don't care for. And I haven't read Age of Madness. I'm probably not going to because I know everybody says it's better, but like I read 7 of Joe Abercrombie's books, and I think they're okay at best, and they're just not for me. Like I
You see,
rated
you
some of
you
them
you
pretty
probably did a
well.
lot of it in print though. Like I
Granted,
am so
yes, all of
curious.
it.
I am so curious what my experience of First Law would have been if I just did it in print. I did it 100% through Stephen Pacey audio, and he had me just enraptured with his performance. Like that experience is just a different one than you had with the same
I
text,
have
and so
heard
like
that.
we almost it's like apples and oranges. We can't compare our experiences.
I did do Red Country on audio, and I quite liked it, even though it has some major plot holes. I think it was for Abercrombie, it was fairly complete. Um, The Heroes is my favorite though. I did do that one print too.
Yeah,
I
yeah, that's
I
my
I
favorite. That's
love
my
The
favorite.
Heroes. If Gorst wasn't in it, it would be a phenomenal book, but he ruins it for me. And that's what for me,
With his
Abercrombie
high
can't help
voice.
himself. Well, and that's where like I've heard how the audio is done. I didn't listen to an audio, but I've heard
Mm.
how it's done. But Abercrombie for me, it's like he's a talented author in some ways, but like he can't help himself with just beating you over the head with the sarcasm. And that's where like the end of Heroes, I'm just like give it a rest because like this is such a good book. Stop beating me over the head with the
Mm.
sarcasm. Just let it stand on its own. Use some subtlety and because there's even a line that's literally like, "Oh, I get it. You're a hero." And I'm just like, "Shut up. Come on." And this is a book that I really legitimately
That
liked
word
a
did come
lot.
up a lot in that book. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't love how much he returned to, like, that title word. It did feel a little much, even though I
There
love
was
the book.
there was so much good in it. Like, there's so many bits of it that were really well done. And so that's where I just think it's his style isn't really for me. And like,
Yeah, yeah.
Best of
And
Cold was just like genre parody to me, is what
oh,
it felt
I
like,
that's the only First
just a
Love book
revenge
that I
movie.
actively disliked. So we got a little overlap there. I thought that was such a tired plot. Like it
Yeah.
just I felt like there was enough there maybe for a little novella, but to to spend the entire book on this repetitive revenge plot with a character that I didn't care if they achieved revenge or whatever happened to them. Like, yeah, that book was the only big failure of First Law for me.
Also, when your big twist is shared by a critically panned Adam Sandler movie, I feel like that should tell you something about the quality of your book.
Wait, which movie?
That's My Boy. I don't know if you ever
Oh,
saw that.
okay.
It's not
No,
good. It's
yeah.
not a good movie, but it's Adam Sandler and Andy Samberg, and the
Ooh.
big twist of that movie is the same big twist of Best Served Cold, but it's actually done better in the Adam Sandler movie, which is sad. Um,
Oh god.
it's not good in either one.
Oh no. Oh, is Andrew talking about First Law? That's
Last
the
Argument of
last
Kings.
argument of
Yeah,
Kings.
terrible
Oh
ending.
man. Yeah.
In my opinion.
Once again, my whole experience that is so biased by having it delivered by Stephen Pacey, and I was just loving listening to that so much. Song of Ice and Fire. What were your gripes with Song of Ice and Fire? So I am not gonna meet that with a giant wall of hate since I liked it but didn't fully fall in love with it all. So I'm interested in hearing this.
So that's the thing I accidentally DNF'd because I lost my copy of A Feast for Crows. To this day, I don't know what happened to it, but I took that as a sign from God that I was allowed to stop reading it because I wasn't enjoying the series. But that's my original unpopular take. I read it in high school. And and yes, I know I'm a Wheel of Time fan. It's always pointed out to me this is not a good complaint, but the repetitive writing really irritated me because
Oh, like what?
Martin
Like what?
would well, he likes to reuse the same words, phrases, and certain things over and over again. Like, gosh, going back to my original thing. If any time in the series up to where I read, if anyone is singing a song, no matter where they are, what continent they're on, it's the Bear and the Maiden Fair every time, every single time. And To this
I
day,
never
I have a
noticed
friend.
that.
I have a friend who will randomly say it's a Mummer's farce because he knows how much it pisses me off. Because I'd like to know how many times Mummer's farce appears in those books because the number's got to be astronomical. Everything
Yeah.
ever is a Mummer's farce.
So
But
so this I totally get. If I am noticing a repetitive word, it will piss me off. Except most of the time when my immersion switches on, I am not really looking on the lookout for like repetitive
fair.
word choices or like little things like the repetition of the song. Like I'm just not on my radar's not out for it. It's the books when I haven't been immersed. Like when I read Stavely's Empire's Ruin, like his newest release for the sequel series. I only read this because Kyle forced me into a buddy read for it, and
Mm,
I never was able to get immersed in that. And so I was noticing the prose a lot more. And he
makes sense.
repeated the word blaze like 100 times throughout the book in lots of different situations for fire, for describing eyes, for describing like emotions. And I flagged every time, and I gave Kyle a hoot when I like recited every instance of Blaze during our chat about the book. Um, and that totally bothered me when I was noticing it. And I took like every time I saw it on the page, it would take me out of the moment and the narrative. And a couple times in like some Malazan books, I noticed some repetitive word choices and things like that. Like, so I
Potsherds.
understand it. If I notice it, so if you were noticing things like that,
Oh,
it seems a
constantly.
little petty, but it actually like really affects the whole experience.
Yeah. Well, it's that and like the overuse of sexual content and the way to me, just a lot of it comes off as like creepy and weird. The way he wrote it specifically, I wasn't a fan of either. Um, but it's just also, and I will
Yeah,
say,
no,
I'll
can't
die on
argue,
the
can't argue
hill
with
of,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I will die on the hill of too many characters die because I didn't care about any characters. There was no motivation for me to care about any character because they're probably just going to die. So why do I really care what happens? It's just so many characters die by the time, and I'm like Feast for Crows is what, the third book, I think, or is that the
Oh,
fourth?
fourth,
Fourth?
fourth, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, by that point, there's like 3 people who haven't died since book 1. I know I'm exaggerating, but like, so I just like I didn't really care that much anymore either too. And people were like, "Oh, it's realistic." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm reading a fantasy book. I don't need it to be realistic. I need it to be good."
Yeah, yeah.
And but so it's
On
there are a
on
lot of
this on
things.
this point in particular, I'm more with you than not with you on that. I prefer something less grimdark, like Stormlight Archive or Wheel of Time, where like it is a little bit more on the fantasy escapist side with that optimistic bent, a little bit of plot armor for a lot of the main and side characters, and I'm worried for them along the way, but not too worried because I think most of them, if not all of them, are gonna like be there at least like towards
Yeah.
like the ending arcs of things. And I don't know, I do like that. I like keeping our cast together. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, Martin has
And
been
you
dropping
can
like
find a
flies.
balance.
I think John
You
Gwynn
can
does the balance pretty well actually in those books,
yeah,
because people
that's
people
actually what I
do
was
drop.
thinking. And that was a so that my speaking of repetitive words, and I really liked Faithful and the Fallen. It is in my top 10 series, but
Mhm.
that man uses so many times. I wanted to tear my hair out every single time someone goes,
I didn't
huh.
notice that. I didn't notice that at all. I didn't notice that.
I I complained to Andrew so much about that as I was reading that series, but like I was, it took me a while to get into it because the first book I thought was okay, and
Mhm.
granted, my favorite character gets killed off in the first book, so you're like, okay, he's not afraid to kill. I didn't say who it was, so it's not a spoiler. But so I'm like, okay, he's not afraid to kill characters, and I thought book 2 was a little bit better, but I'm still like, I don't get what everybody sees in this. And then book 3, I'm like, truth and courage, and I'm
Yeah,
so in by Ruin. So like I
oh,
loved
that's
the
cool
last
that
two.
that
You
he
know?
that's cool that he got you invested. It took some
Yeah.
time and that you gave it that chance and were patient with it. That's awesome. I think he did a great job though of keeping the stakes really high through like strategic character deaths along the way, but not going too overboard with it. And it's not that long of a series, so there's not that much time to
Yeah.
put in the different character deaths. Like Yeah, the
Ooh.
follow-up series was interesting. I didn't love it nearly as much as Faithful and the
I
Fallen. Um,
I still haven't tried it. It's mostly
yeah,
his fault.
yeah, you
Heidi has a good
like.
question. Have you read Memory Thorn?
Oh, that's one of those priority ones on the TBR. So when I came back to fantasy as an adult, have been prioritizing a lot more of the recent things that have been really popular and just in the conversation with everyone. You know, the Sanderson, Butcher, Abercrombie, Gwynn, Erickson, Hobb. And so I need to do a lot better job of catching up on the 70s, 80s, 90s. So like things on my priority TBR, like Ted Williams, Memory Star Throne. I want to try this maybe like starting next year. Like Chronicles of Amber. Let's see, lots of
Amber's so
90s
weird.
and things like Janny Wirtz and Kate Elliott but yeah, Tad's up there at the top of my priority TBR. So
So good.
yeah.
That's
Oh
yeah.
yeah,
I
you like that? Yeah.
Memory Thorn, I think, as of last one, is number 2 series. Um, Granted, it
Ooh.
got there somewhat on the demerits of Realm of the Elderlings, but
Ooh.
I
Have you
did
continued with the
absolutely love it.
sequels?
It is okay. So I wanted to read his Shadow March
Mm-hmm.
quadrilogy first. I'm not going to do that. I really want to read the new series, and the last book will be out soon, so I'm gonna start probably next month. I did read the Heart of What Was Lost, which is like an in between book, and it was meh, but it's not like a mainline book. So I'm very excited, um, very excited to get to that because it's yeah I loved it, and I've heard really good things about the new series as well. So I'm very excited
Oh,
um,
nice. And
to get to
so,
that as
and
well.
you, I want to get to something that I recently had you read. You read fantasy just from lots of different eras, but it seems like a little recently you were in like just a little bit of a rut uh, like reading a lot of things that weren't fully hitting for you, and I thought, ooh, something that's doing something fresh and new and fun in modern fantasy that is like super accessible and just like easy to get into and would might hit the spot. So I am curious how this worked because this is a trilogy I have heard zero about. It's Trad Pub and
I'd
being so
never heard of
enmeshed in
it.
this
Yeah.
community. Empire of Salt. I mean, until Kyle came to me one day, he's like, I've had this series on my TBR for a while. You want to buddy read it? I'm like, okay, sure. I've had a bunch of Con Eggleton's Hisfic books on the TBR. I'm like, oh, I didn't know he wrote a fantasy series. And there's something about like British publishers like forced Christian Cameron or Miles Cameron, whatever his real name is, they forced him to change his name for like writing fantasy books because like
Hmm.
his historical fiction publisher, I think, was worried that like publishing under the same name with fantasy would delegitimize him. And I think Con Eggleton's publisher forced him into the same thing and forced him to write under a pseudonym for fantasy, which is ridiculous because like
I was
let
wondering, like,
let the established
how
fans
many?
of a
Yeah.
popular author like know that he's writing other books so that they can sell more of them. And it's so good. And so it's not going to delegitimize. It's going to get people excited for his other books. But what's so cool about this is that I don't know much about Con Eggleton, but if you look at his bibliography, he spent basically all the 2000s publishing historical fiction, like English history, Mongolian, ancient Roman, and Greek stuff. And after multiple decades of doing that, he publishes this fantasy series. And to me, this is just like what I imagine. Like he was just wanted to be unfettered. Like the chains are off
Yeah.
him. He doesn't have to stick to any historical fact or time period. He could just do whatever he wants. And just the creativity in here with the magic was so fun and interesting. And I think the world building is kind of cool too because it's so minimal. This is like the most minimal world building of any secondary world fantasy I've ever seen. It's just like you are just within this one city state And then book 2 expands it though to this other city state, but still like it only expands like the world. It's like everything's in shadow. I'm imagining this map of Darien, and everything around it's in shadow. And then book 2, it's like, oh, we can unshadow the city state over here to the east, Shang. So the world gets a little bit bigger, and then gets a tiny bit bigger in the third book. But like the world building is like of the geography and the history and politics, like that is just not the thing with these books. He like deprioritizes all of that, and so these are so just like fast paced, just like fun plotted books that are character driven. I've read nothing like them before, but I am curious, what do you end up thinking? I know I saw your review, so I kind of got the feel, but love to hear your thoughts on reading some Con Eagledon fantasy.
Well, and so I have not actually read any of Con Eagledon's historical fiction, and I've read a little historical fiction here and there, but not a ton. And so it's like one of those things, like I know the name, but yeah, that's I'd never heard of this whatsoever until you brought it up, and this was so for me. See, normally I love world building. It's one of my favorite things about fantasy. So it was interesting because that really isn't the focus here, and yet I found myself really enjoying this. So this was one of those books where, like, I think I rated it 3 stars, which is like I liked it, but I had some issues with it. But at the same time, I was very engaged, and it was exactly what I needed. It was something very engaging and very quick to get through, and I'm absolutely curious what happens next. So it's
Oh
not like,
yeah, and
"Yeah, I was fine." Like,
yes,
I'm
yes,
very,
and
very interested to continue.
and the he raises his game, I think, in these 2 books. Like the stakes rise, and it's the introduction of the other city state and the other culture that really just makes the series what it is, with this kind of clash of cultures, but like meeting of cultures and people traveling between the 2 places. And like that is what really is at the heart of the series, is the interplay between the 2 cultures and the characters that kind of travel. And like so like book 1 is a nice appetizer, but like the series becomes what it is with these books. And
That's why you have me
man,
excited.
yes. uh, but like it's so weird that these are like certain Tradbub stuff just gets so lost in the shuffle. It's like you figure, how could that happen? Because there's not that much like adult fantasy released in Tradpub. There's not that many publishers that are even out there now, and there's not that many publishers releasing like adult fantasy. So like usually I think people typically hear about, like, it's a lot of Torrid Orbit, and this is Penguin, I think. I don't know, but they just
Well, and it seems like
completely just did no marketing. Like if I look at Goodreads, like none of my friends on Goodreads have read it. It's so weird. I don't know what's going on with it.
well, it seems like it's only published in the UK is the thing too, because that was where, like, you can't get,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
there's no ebook or audiobook available technically in the US. And
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I bought this on, or well, you bought this technically, but this is from Amazon, and it's so you can buy it in the US, but it's the UK edition. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I know sometimes you do that. Like I know Faithful and the Fallen had a weird thing. That's why you couldn't get hardcovers in the US, because they
Yeah.
were only
Yeah.
allowed
Yeah.
in the UK or something. So weird thing, but yeah, no, it's nice to do something different. And I think that, because even in my review, like a lot of my critiques felt like it was more just his style and the way he did it, somewhat intentionally. But I think, to an author who's used to writing historical fiction and writing fantasy, and I've read some examples where it didn't work, but here it was just like he was comfortable, like you may in a well-known historical period, just telling you what happens, not having to explain why, just saying this happened. Because in historical fiction, if you're talking about a real historical event, you can just say, this is a thing that
Mhm.
happened, and now we're going to explore it. So he does that sometimes here. Like, hey, this happened, we're going to just move on from it, I'm not going to spend time explaining it. And so, like, part of me, that's where, like, the analytical part of my brain is like, no, 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 I want to know why. Or like, you can't just do that, you can't just suddenly move on to something else, what are you doing? And like, so that part of my brain like rebels, but at the same time I'm just like, yeah, but like there's no lull here, there's no spot where this like slows
Yeah.
down. Like, in fact, it gets like way bigger at the end of the book. And so that's where,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's something
Oh,
I
there's
I
some,
had
and
some issues with, but I'm
there
excited.
continues to be cool reveals about like each book you get exposed to some of the magical artifacts that are we didn't see before, and they always do something interesting, and everyone has all these unique magical powers. And so I love that it's like, I love actually magic systems. Like everyone is very quick to crap on magic systems. I actually love it. Like love the one in Lightbringer, love Sanderson's magic systems. I love a good hard magic system, but like this feels like the opposite, where like people just have unique individual powers just kind of randomly, and I just love what he does with that, and just the creativity. It felt fresh, like the way magic was integrated in. And also I have no clue his process behind writing these, but like I get the sense that it is like the anti Sanderson or Jordan approach to world building, like that he didn't spend like a long amount of time like working out the lore and the geography of like that. He is just like bare bones skeleton of like world building. I think it's like an alternate version of Earth. Like there's mention of certain place names. Did that happen in Darien, where there was like a mention of certain place names that were actually like real Earth places or historical places? Like it's just never, the world building like geographically is just never explored, and it's just not a focus at all. Like he's just, and so like I just think he took this as like he probably had obligations for his fic like publishing deals, and that like this was just like a quick break he could take, and he just like raced and wrote these stories without doing like a lot of like the lore and world building, and like it makes them unique, because there's nothing that I've read in epic fantasy that feels like that. But Zamar also agrees that books 2 and 3 are even better. Yeah, let's get the Empire of Salt hype train going.
Yeah, I definitely plan to check them out. And you mentioned the different magic abilities, because that was, I latched onto that because it was a great piece of world building that was just kind of thrown it out there. But I love the idea that it's just a thing where, like, different people have a different knack, where they have this miscellaneous magical ability, and it just kind of happens. And that's such a cool detail. And so it sounds like we're gonna see more of that. So that makes me very happy as well. But it's just,
And
there's
the magic
so much of the stuff that
too is like,
happens.
it's this interesting world building where you feel like you're just getting the tip of the iceberg, and maybe he has built it out beyond, but he does. It's not in the book, so it doesn't need to be built out. But like,
I gotcha.
there's a sense that the history of this area, like that, there used to be this like more magical empire that used to like be in the same place that is now just long gone, and something more akin to like pre-modern London is in its place and developing, and that like those magical artifacts that the noble families have, like they've just been passed down, but they don't know like how they work or how to create more, or like there's just these remnants of this more magical past, which is a trope I kind of really liked. But I thought the way he executed that was just brilliant throughout this trilogy. So yeah, I look forward to seeing how you end up going with the sequels, because I suspect that you'll find them to be better than book 1. So we got to get you into books 2 and 3 before too much time has passed. And I did a good binge of all 3, and I thought that was great with these. But Drew, we're still going strong.
I am going to have to go soon, but I keep getting sidetracked with different things. But I do need to grab these. I've been trying to like not buy books for the most part, and I've been doing pretty well. But you get kind of it gets grandfathered in if I'm continuing a series, so it doesn't count quite the same way. So that now that I have the first book already, I have an excuse to be like, well. And
that was my strategy. That was definitely my strategy there.
It worked. I mean, I ended up picking it up almost immediately, because I just was kind of like, yeah, I could use something different. But you brought up something which I will be quick on, because it's a whole different thing. But the trope of like the ancients that were more magical, because that is in so many different series, and it's in a lot of series that I love as well. So that's a trope that I find it interesting that's used so often, but it's one I also have never really gotten tired of. Because like Wheel of Time, for example, has it, but like Gentlemen Bastards, there's you still have almost nothing revealed of what it was, but there were these ancients there that were more advanced in some way, and like you see that so much. It's always an interesting trope, and I feel like
Yeah.
maybe it's just cheap world building because you can just kind of throw it out there, but like it always makes me think, and it gets me
It does. It does. It makes it gives more substance and weight and history to the world, and a sense of mystery and wonder. Like, ooh, what was happening and going on back there? What happened to them? And what's still hanging around that still could play a part? Yeah, it is a bit of a cheat code for fantasy, but hey, there are certain advantages that fantasy has that can engage us in ways that just like sticking to realistic, like modern day stuff. Like I've read a lot of those books before getting into fantasy, and like the more heroic, elevated things that we can experience in fantasy books, like a last stand in a 6-tiered fortress, like in Legend by a warrior coming out of retirement, like this story could only happen in a fantasy epic, and there's a certain elevation and transcendence that authors can achieve when there's no limit to their imagination than when we're just like writing about life in New York City in in the 2000s. And they're like, so I love it, even if some things in fantasy are a bit of cheat code. That's okay. Some things really just work.
Yeah.
And I don't mind them going back to the well. Speaking of Gemmel, I've only read Legend and then King Beyond the Gate, and I kind of lost my momentum with Draenei because King Beyond the Gate felt like a kind of Legend redux, and
yes.
And so I don't know, when I lost my momentum and my like full investment, like I lost my enthusiasm to continue. I keep on meaning to go back and do like Waylander and continue with Draenei. But like, do you have any recommendation for what I should do to reinvigorate myself with Gemmel?
So, I read them in pub order, which most people tell you is dumb, and you don't have to do. However, I think the next one that comes out after King Beyond the Gate is Quest for Lost Heroes, which remains one of my favorites. It is you will see a lot of very similar themes in Gamel books and some things. Waylander is also very good and a bit different. But if you're looking for some of the ones that are a bit different, Quest for Lost Heroes and Winter Warriors are really good. For that, you're going to have a lot of similar archetypes as well, but yeah, it's King Beyond the Gate is um, one of my least favorites just because it really did kind of just feel like Legend redone. But then you get I read the other Druss books way later, which I also feel like helped because they each add a little something to Legend in a really interesting way. Um, but you also don't want to necessarily read those ones too close together. So yeah, Waylander is good and is a very different character because you're following Waylander the Slayer, the world's like best assassin. Quest for Lost Heroes has a little bit more humor. It's a young man engages some old retired over the hill heroes to try to save a girl, but in kind of a more satirical way. And
Oh,
Winter
that sounds fun.
Warriors, yeah, it's still one of my favorites. It's so good because it has a lot of plays on tropes. Winter Warriors is the one that has more magic than most, and also just has some like amazing character stuff in there too. So,
By the way, that
um,
sounds like the plot of Kings of the Wild. you just described. Did you read Kings of the Wild? That sounds
yes,
like the exact plot of Kings of the Wild.
King, Kings of the Wild felt like the description of that book felt like it was written for me, and I was a bit disappointed with it. I didn't hate it or anything, but that was one I felt like tonally it couldn't decide if it wanted me to take it seriously or not, and so I struggled with it because it would like
Yeah,
try to
yeah,
get really
yeah.
serious, but then it would do things where like, oh, don't look into this too hard, and so it's kind
I
of
struggle with that as well. With that, when there's a tonal kind of mismatch, and then I don't know, what I need to be getting invested in or not, and or if it. I like a long time ago, I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I fully just embraced the absurdity of it and had a
you
good
kind of
time
have
with
to
it.
with
But
that.
like, yeah, but like, yeah, you're right. With Kings of the Wild, it's like, oh, there's some pretty absurd things going on, and then there's some dark, serious things. I struggled with this actually. I just read The Crimes of Rooker Flynn, and I didn't. I like Legend of Blackjack, but in these books, I struggle with this mismatch of like the real like silliness of it mixed with like also like darker moments and a high stakes plot. And I personally, I see people not struggling with that, and that I know that this is just a thing that is not for
I
me. I
could see
think.
that. It does depend. So here's a Quest for Lost Heroes and Waylander. I have Winter Warriors too. Down here.
I have those exact MMPBs from used bookstores.
That's where I picked up. Winter Warriors has a fun cover too.
Did you like the
Oh.
Waylander books?
Yeah, I really
Okay.
enjoyed the series. I liked all of them. There were some I liked a little bit less, but I liked all of them, and I did them over time. I also liked the audio, but not everyone does.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
like Barrett. He's not
he's,
like
I
gonna
mean,
wow you with like he's not gonna wow you with
yeah,
like a pacey like performance, but he's solid. I like solid workman like narrators where you could just get immersed, like you don't they get out of the way and they don't do anything weird or crazy where you're like noticing them too much. I like that too, just as much as like an amazing performance.
So I got to tell you a quick anecdote about Waylander though, because um, it's so fun. So Waylander came about because David Gemmell was teaching a class, and he was telling his students, you have to think about pacing, because if you start pacing too quickly, you won't be able to keep up, and your book's not going to be as good, and like readers aren't going to be engaged. And somebody asked, well, what's an example of a really bad first line that would start the pacing off too bad? And he said, they had begun to torture the priest when the stranger stepped from the shadows of the trees. And that was his example. And then he kept thinking about it. And then he wrote Waylander, where that's the first line of chapter
so
one.
so he
Uh,
actually liked he didn't use it like ironically, like he ended up liking his line as a starter.
yeah.
Yeah.
He
Oh,
ended up
that's
like using it
hilarious.
as an example. You shouldn't do this. And then he's like, oh, that's actually kind of good. And then he ends up
Oh
writing
my
it.
god.
So,
That's
yeah.
hilarious. That's getting me hyped to start that book now. Um, Niko wants you to sell me on Haporson. I do want to hear before you go for the night. What are your most heartfelt, like knowing kind of what I've enjoyed over the years? What are your biggest wrecks? Like I know Jenny Wirtz, it's a priority to get to Trouthouse Chasm. Kate Elliott, I know you would probably recommend me. Anything
Especially with
I'm
historical
missing?
fiction reading. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, those are definitely some big
And if
ones.
you want to sell me more on that, I don't. I hear so little about that series. It gets one of those that just gets lost in the fray.
Yeah, well, Crown of Stars, I think specifically because Crown of Stars it's in like alternate Europe, and they're like all of the places have an analog to a real place,
Ooh, I'm
and
liking
it
that in
also so
GGK, so that's
yeah,
working for me.
so it really does. It starts pretty grounded, and it has a lot of historical fiction or historical fantasy feel, but then it builds a little bit more world building, a little bit more magic as you go along, and just continues to go. And so it's also like I think the most realistic, gritty medieval fantasy I've ever read, and it focuses a lot on the details. So. Um, it's one of those things I think if you're immersed, you'll really enjoy it, but if you're not
Ooh,
immersed, you might struggle a bit. It does deal a
interesting.
lot with religion, though, I will say. So you have to be okay with exploration of religion because that is very
I mean,
important
so
to
far in
the series.
GGK, like that's played a fairly prominent role.
Yeah.
Like in Lions of Alrasan, um, I enjoyed that aspect of the theming of Lions of Alrasan, and I can't think of many fantasy series that I've read that religion plays like a huge major role. Like I haven't done Five
Oh, I
Warrior
love it.
Angels yet. Um, I don't know if
I
there's
mean,
others where.
I've been mixed on that one, but so his religious bits, I'm pretty sure were inspired by Crown of Stars because he's a fan of the series.
Oh, okay.
Actually, he's also really inspired by Tad Williams, as well. So the Brian Lee Durfee is another one who he seems like a fantastic guy. I wasn't the biggest fan of his books, but I
Yeah, I
like
have that same
he
worry.
loves so many things.
I have not read. I love him to death as a person, and
Yeah.
like watching his
The-
book reviews and videos. But like, I am so worried that I'm not gonna love the writing, so I haven't dived in. I look at them on the shelf and like, oh, they're really badass covers, and I love the titles, and I like having them, but I'm in no rush to actually have the bubble burst on that one.
So Drew just teed me up for one I was going to recommend because
Ooh,
I just finished Shadow of Smoking Mountain a couple days
ooh,
ago, and it's phenomenal. I had an e-arc of it, but so I've been going on about this book, and Andrew, after like a year of me browbeating him, finally read it and absolutely loved it as well. This is Lord of a Shattered Land by Howard Andrew Jones. This is a modern sword and sorcery epic.
when is it from?
Um, it's pretty new. It came out in 2023, so
Whoa,
very new
what
actually.
publisher? What publisher?
This is from Bane, which
Oh, that's
Bane
why
is
I don't stay on top
yeah.
of Bane releases.
Yeah. Well, they're kind of a little bit more niche. But yeah, book 3 comes out in October, and I just finished it, and it's fantastic. But so it's like sword and sorcery, but it's done. And I know this is, I've read some of the older sword and sorcery, and I don't like a lot of it because it's kind of shallow. And this is not. It's extremely, the main character is fantastic. This also, the main character is like Hannibal, is kind of an analog
Ooh,
for that historically. And you have like the Dervan Empire, the Roman
ooh,
Empire, who so you have some of that historical feel. It's also the first book, especially, is very episodic, and it has elements of like cosmic horror and some like psychological type things. It's got the fantasy stuff. It's got just the really character focused stuff. Really, really good. Really, really easy to read. The self pub side. Have you? I don't think you've read Collation Saga by Andrew D. Meredith, have you?
not yet. No, no.
Okay. So I figured I'd go one too, because this is one I've really, really been loving too. And since you're somebody who really likes to get immersed, Andrew D.
Mhm.
Meredith, which also he narrates his own books and does a fantastic job as well. And so I've done a mix. But his stuff is just like his storytelling. I get so sucked into it. And that's where, like, with reading it, with listening to the audio in general, I just really, really enjoy getting pulled in. It's a
Ooh.
very epic fantasy. Like, there's no normal, like, there are no horses. There are Sleipnirs, which have 6 legs and like things like that. So it's
I
very high
love stuff like
fantasy.
I love immersive high fantasy
Yeah.
world building like Stormlight Archive.
And yeah,
Okay,
it's
how
so
many
much stuff.
books are out in that versus like how many are planned?
So the fourth book is coming out soon. There's actually a Kickstarter going on for it right now, which I sold enough books on Pango to finally back because I wanted to back it. Uh,
Oh,
but yes,
Pete's also wrecking Collation. Okay,
yes,
love it.
and I have the fourth book's not out yet, but I've also read it because I got an early copy of that, and it's the end of the first arc is after the fourth book, so it's a great time to start. He plans, I think, around like 9 books total. But this is the first 4 books are one arc, and it's a very good ending. But yeah, it's so immersive, and it's like as you see the bigger, it starts off very character focused, but then there's like the gods are very real and they're very involved in what's going on as well.
Oh wow,
And
8 in the
8, there we
series
go.
and 8 in a prequel series. Let's go.
Yeah,
I
he
love
he has
people
a
doing
lot
big
planned.
series. I love it. Okay, I gotta support this because Endeavor, because as you mentioned, there's not too many people doing the long, huge epic fantasy
Yeah,
series, and I have a huge soft spot for that when I can just have so many books like Wheel of Time, Dresden. Uh, wait, what else? Oh, Shadows of the Apt. Have you done Shadows of the Apt yet at all? Tried it? Uh,
I I very much plan to, but I have not yet. It's on my list. I'll probably end up doing audio because I think they're on script.
and
But
they're
I haven't
good.
gotten
They're
to them
real.
yet.
The audios are really good. Really good.
So
Okay, that's a good way to do the series, and it's not like written in a way that's hard to imbibe through audio. Like the prose is pretty straightforward, but I think solid. Um, okay, I think that might be a hit for you in terms of my recs that come out of this night. That's one
okay.
of my faves, and you love the big sprawling political series. Um,
Yes.
this is heavily inspired by kind of like the politicking in the lead up to World War II, but with
Okay.
Tchaikovsky's just so creative, like biological world building, with all of the insectoid like hybrid human races. And it's so good. It's so good, and the action is amazing and gritty and tense, and it's definitely like closer to the the like the Sanderson side than like the grimdark side
Okay.
of tone, I think. or the overall arc or like the bent of optimism versus like cynicism. So it's definitely on that optimism side of things, and I think that's a pretty safe bet for you. That's probably one that'll come out of my probably big rec for you, outside of making sure we finish the Empire Assault trilogy.
Yes. Well, that one I
Okay,
definitely will. And yeah.
So I got Collation. Okay, that sounds good. I want to support big epic fantasy projects, and that sounds good because you're right. It is so many trilogies are coming out, and it's just like everywhere you look, it's trilogies. And those are cool. I'd like
This
being
is
able to
4 books.
Yeah.
So it's not technically a trilogy.
Wait, what is the name of that series? What is the name of that one?
This is the Hanuvar Chronicles, or the Chronicles of Hanuvar.
The Chronicles of Hanuvar. All right, so that is not the Chronicles of Sword and Sand, nor is it the Ringsworn trilogy. He has a lot of
same author as Ringsworn, though.
There's a lot of recent releases. Okay, is that wait, Hanuvar? How many are out for Hanuvar? Is it 2?
Book 4 comes out in October.
Oh wow!
I'm sorry,
okay, so
book 3. I'm sorry, book 3 comes out in October. No, 2 are out now.
I got it. Okay, that's an author I truly have like not even really heard of before today that you brought this up. I mean, I've maybe heard the name, but it's never registered.
I got his Ringsworn trilogy because they were on Book Outlet, so that's literally why I ended up trying it.
Oh, okay. And, I gotta look out for him on Book Outlet then.
So they might still be on there, but that's really solid. But the Hanuvar books are next level. They're very different, and they're so much better in my opinion. But there's a line in the first Ringsworn book, which I'm actually some people wanted to read it in Discord, so I said I'm like, heck, I'll do a reread on audio, and that works. But there's a line where a character is like, he's been betrayed, and there's one person left, and he's like, you tell your boss this, you tell that, and then he's like, you know what, and he said, I'll leave an effing note, and then just kills him. And it's like that's the line, and I'm just like, I love it. And there's kind of a very different context where there's a line like that in the third Hanuvar book that's just also just great and kind of plays around with the trope of the grandstanding villain, and I'm like, I love it. So it's really fun.
I can go for a little silliness and satire, like when the balance is struck right, like with the Dundercrawler Carl series. Like I have loved that one, and doing that on audio is a treat. Yeah. Have you tried that one? Yeah.
I absolutely love it. I couldn't imagine reading them physically.
Yeah. Me neither.
I've listened to the whole thing twice because I listened to everything before the new one. And I just saw my brother-in-law for the first time in a while, and he is not a reader at all, but I had told him to try the first Carl book, and he absolutely loved them. And he's like, I need to find what else I listen to next, because he loved it so much. Yeah. So big. I don't really like lit RPG or progression much. So Dungeon Crawler Carl is like the exception that I just absolutely love. But it's great.
Yeah, it's something special. It's something so fresh and unique. Just like Empire of Salt, like it feels like it's in its like subgenre niche, like that it's doing something weird and different, and if it hits right, yeah. What is your saying?
I just saw that. It makes me laugh. But I suppose for my final thoughts, I'm supposed to sell you on Abhorsen. So
that is currently not really on the TBR, because I've heard it's like, is it YA? I don't know.
Yes. And that's why I waited so long to try it, because my middle school library shouldn't have, apparently, but my middle school library had Sabriel, the first book. And I always meant to read it. I read some of Garth Nix's actual like younger stuff when I was younger. And I liked it. But I never read this. And I'm like, it's YA. So as an adult, I never went back. It is YA, but it's a lot more adult than you would think. And it's a lot darker than you would think. In some really interesting ways. It deals with some like heavy themes, but like the Abhorsen is a necromancer who's in charge of like putting spirits to rest so they don't come over from the gate of death. And the impetus of the first book is the main character Sabriel, her father, the Abhorsen, is killed, and she has to take over. Like that's how the first book starts. Ooh. So already not what you would expect. Yeah. But the trilogy happens over time and with some different characters, and is just like it's younger reading in that it's kind of simpler plot wise and it's easy to
Mhm.
follow, but it actually deals with it actually deals with a lot of like deeper things. Like the second book, despite the fact that the main character is like 14, it deals with suicidal ideation in a really responsible way, in a really realistic way, actually. And which once again, 100% was not expecting at all. So it actually deals with some really adult themes, but in a way that's readable and like something that'll give you something as an adult, but also somebody younger reading it might find it relatable. So, and
Yeah.
the audio is narrated by Tim Curry. Is the mic drop?
Ooh.
I thought you'd like that.
Is from Clue the
Yes,
yeah. Oh, I love Tim Curry.
he
I was
narrates
just
the
thinking.
audio. So,
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about Clue recently because I read the Spiffbo winner, Murder at Spindle Manor, and this is like
okay,
fantasy. This is like fantasy Clue, and so I was just thinking about some great scenes from Clue or just moments. So yeah, Tim Curry is a great. Okay, that's a big yeah. Just on the TBR now. I
it's
want to.
good.
I wish I had read more in YA because I actually have three nieces and nephews that are like a couple of them are teenagers and my niece is a little younger, but like I don't have a lot that I can recommend them besides adult fantasy. Um, and so I should read a little
Yeah.
bit more YA so I could have more like that I could actually like get behind as far as recommendations go.
Yeah, I skipped a lot of it because I started Wheel of Time so young. The other YA book that, granted, like older YA probably,
Mhm.
but Fireborn by Rosaria Mundo.
I have that. I got that
Uh,
on Book Outlet, so I do have it. I do have it.
that that book, I wish it wasn't YA because you could repackage that
Mm.
very easily as an adult grimdark book, very easily,
Ooh,
and it would be
ooh,
a lot better.
interesting.
It's just a fantastic story that they threw some YA stuff to make it marketable
Ooh,
into,
mm.
but it's so good.
Ooh,
It's a
okay, okay,
deeply
nice.
character focused story around a toxic relationship with two dragon riders, kind of. It's based on Plato's Republic too,
Oh,
which
I've
wasn't
read
expecting either.
I've read
Um,
a good amount of the Republic in various philosophy classes over the years. So okay, that you've sold me on that. Oh, quick one before I forget. Have you done the Magician's Trilogy yet by Lev Grossman?
I haven't. Do you think I would like that? Because I've always been afraid I wouldn't.
Oh, I have no clue. It's so out there in what it's doing that I think I could just as easily imagine anyone completely bouncing off of it or loving it to death like I do. Like I just had Zamar read it and he really connected to it and he loved it. It is it's like a deconstruction of Portal Fantasy, like in the Chronicles of
Hmm,
Narnia, like kind of way. Just like Erickson's like he's talked about wanting to deconstruct like epic fantasy tropes. Like Grossman, I think is definitely doing that with like the Narnia style Portal Fantasy. And this one is one though I would wholeheartedly recommend trying on audio. And that because
okay.
Mark Bramhall is just like one of those master narrators who's just kind of like on another level and brings out a lot of the emotional nuance in the book that I might not have gotten if I just read it in print. Um, but it's there. It's like a really psychological, deep kind of work that's definitely more on the literary side than most uh, like modern fantasy, and which is I think why it has such a mixed reaction in the community because a lot of people really
Yeah.
bounce off it. I think because it has a more like because Grossman started out I think as more of a litfic writer and then shifted gears with the Magician's Trilogy. Um, and it's so like emotionally resonant for me and doing so many interesting things on a plot front and moving the story along really quickly and just being surprising and unpredictable around every corner. It's one I would definitely recommend on the audiobook front to try out at some point.
Well, I will check because that's one that my library very well may actually have. Um,
Yeah, because it's pretty
I'll have to
popular
look.
because it had
Yeah.
had the TV show, and so yeah, I would imagine your library would have it. So that's okay. That's one that comes out of this because I've already gotten you into Empire of Salt. Shadows of the Apt was already on your radar, so I gotta get something else onto your TBR from today, and it is going to be The Magician's audiobook for sure. Samar says, have to be in the right mood for it, but The Magician's was awesome in a disturbingly relatable way.
I was laughing one comment up.
Yeah, we can ignore that worst book.
Drew
No, but
said
you know what?
still
You know
wants
what
to
though?
read it though. So
I see it. Like if, and you would know actually very quickly. This is not one where I'm like, oh, stick it out if you're not having a good time. Like in the first chapter, the writing voice is so strong for the only POV character in like the whole thing that like from the first chapter, I think, I mean, maybe give it a little bit of maybe a couple chapters until you get into the portal fantasy aspect. But like you should know fairly soon if you're like connecting to the writing style and the character writing style. And so it's not one where I'm like, oh, if you're not having a good time with the first few chapters, like stick it out. Like you might know because the voice is really strong, which is one of its real selling points. Like it has this really strong authorial voice, which is not. It's like if you're used to more of just like the straightforward prose style of a lot of the modern fantasy writers, then it's very understandable to bounce off.
I mean, you know all the stuff that I read though, so I'm not the biggest fan of the straightforward modern fantasy kind of prose necessarily. So
this one is interesting though because it's mostly like from the perspective of this like American, very intellectual, like gifted teenager. Like so it's a lot of like the voice is modern. So it's like 2000s because it's taking place in the 2000s. And so a lot of it has this modern feel, but you can tell Grossman is a very sophisticated prose stylist at the same time. And so it's this interesting combo of that's going into this voice that's making it so unique.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it could be one that could really work.
I'll definitely have to check these out. So, but I really do have to go because I feel like
Oh, we're
gonna keep talking for another hour.
Yes, you've totally. I've kept you on more than 2 hours here. You've gracefully indulged. You've gracefully indulged me because I could go on forever with these.
It's been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. I loved.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of it. Oh, it was a blast. I'm so glad you agreed to come on such short notice, and it was a blast. I definitely want to have more book chats with you, and like I mentioned about buddy reading, they enriched my experience. And so Serenity Mosaic, maybe I'll try to let you know when we're doing it and see if you want to join the group, because I think it might happen in the next month or two.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, definitely, if you have not checked out Niko's book reviews, go over to his channel, subscribe. He is churning out so many quality reviews on a regular basis. I couldn't even imagine getting out that many reviews. And just awesome channel, and just lets you know what you can expect of that book without providing too much of his kind of judgment, and so you don't get spoiled on and you let, I think, he doesn't let his own experience of the book overshadow kind of what you might experience later. So it's just great non-spoiler reviews. And yeah, this was awesome. We will see you later. I hope everyone enjoyed. Whether you were here in the comments, thanks so much for all the people that stuck around. Drew and Zamar and Heidi and Pete and John. Thank you all. And if you watch it on replay, hope you enjoyed yourselves. And we'll catch you later.